Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from the Thom Hartmann Reader. This particular chapter is an excerpt from my book Threshold, by the way. But this is from page 312 of the collected, kind of my collected writings, as it were. It's titled Sociopathic Paychecks. And it starts out with a quote from Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, The Little Prince, 1943. I know a planet where there is a certain red-faced gentleman. He has never smelled a flower. He has never looked at a star. And all day he says over and over, just like you, I am busy with matters of consequence. And that makes him swell up with pride. But he is not a man, he is a mushroom. Okay, to the book. Americans have long understood how socially, politically, and economically destabilizing are huge disparities in wealth. For this reason, the U.S. military and the U.S. civil service have built into them systems that ensure that the highest paid federal official, including the president, will never earn more than 20 times the salary of the lowest paid janitor or Army private. Most colleges have similar programs in place, with the ratios ranging from 10 to 1 to 20 to 1 between the president of the university and the guy who mows the grass. From the 1940s through the 1980s, this was also a general rule of thumb in most of corporate America. When CEOs took more than their fair share, they were restrained by their boards so that the money could be used instead by the company for growth and to open new areas of opportunity. The robber baron J.P. Morgan himself suggested that nobody in a company, including his company, should earn more than 20 times the lowest paid employee. Although he exempted stock ownership from that equation, he owned most of the stock. During the greed is good era of the 1980s, something changed. CEO salaries began to explode at the same time that the behavior of multinational corporations began to change. When Reagan stopped enforcing the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, a mergers and acquisition mania filled the air. And as big companies merged to become bigger, they shed off redundant parts. The result was a series of waves of layoffs as entire communities were decimated, divorce and suicide rates exploded, and America was introduced to the specter of the armed, disgruntled employee. Accompanying the consolidation of wealth and power of these corporations was the very real redefinition of employment, from providing a living wage to people in the community to a variable expense on a profit and loss sheet. Companies that manufactured everything from clothing to television sets discovered that there was a world full of people willing to work for 50 cents an hour or less. Throughout America, factories closed and a building boom commenced among the Asian tigers of Taiwan, South Korea, and Thailand. The process has become so complete that of the millions of American flags bought and waved after the World Trade Center disaster, 9/11, most were manufactured in China. Very, very, very few things are still manufactured in the United States outside of the defense industry, weapons. And it wasn't unthinking, unfeeling corporations that took advantage of the changes in the ways the Sherman Antitrust Act and other laws were enforced by Reagan, Bush Sr., Clinton, and Bush Jr. administrations. It took a special type of human person. In his manuscript, Toys, War, and Faith, Democracy in Jeopardy, Major William C. Gladish suggests that this special breed of person is actually a rare commodity and thus highly valuable. He notes that corporate executives make so much money because of simple supply and demand. There are, of course, many people out there with the best education from the best school, raised in upper-class families who know how to play the games of status, corporate intrigue, and power. The labor pool would seem to be quite large, but Gladish points out there's another and more demanding requirement to meet. They must be willing to operate in a runaway economic and financial system that demands the exploitation of humanity and the environment for short-term gain. This is a disturbing contradiction to their children's interest and their own intelligence, education, cultural appreciation, and religious beliefs. It's the second requirement, Gladish notes, that drastically reduces the number of quality candidates for corporations to pick from. Most people in this group are not willing to forsake God, family, and humanity to further corporate interests in a predatory financial system. For the small percentage of people left, the system continues to increase salaries and benefit packages to entice the most qualified and ruthless to detach themselves from humanity and become corporate executives and their hired guns. One of the questions often asked when the subject of CEO pay comes up is, what would a person like William McGuire or Rex Tillerson, the CEOs of United Healthcare and ExxonMobil, respectively, possibly do to justify a $1.7 billion paycheck or a $400 million retirement bonus? It's an interesting question. If there's a free market for labor or CEOs, you'd think there'd be a lot of competition for the jobs. And a lot of people competing for the positions would drive down the pay. All that United Healthcare stockholders would have to do to avoid paying more than $1 billion to McGuire is find somebody to do the same CEO job for $500 million. And all they'd have to do to save even more is find somebody to do the job for a mere $100 million. Or maybe even somebody who'd work the necessary 60-hour weeks for only $1 million. So why is executive pay so high? I've examined this question with both my psychotherapist hat on and my amateur economist hat on, and only one rational answer presents itself. CEOs in America make as much money as they do because there really is a shortage of well-trained sociopaths. The book is, well, ultimately it's from Threshold, but it's in Thom Hartmann.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. Boy, have you seen the leaked transcripts of Donald Trump's conversations with Peña Nieto? How do you say his name? Peña Nieto? You know, the president of Mexico. You know who I'm talking about, even if I can't pronounce his name correctly. And my apologies to President Peña Nieto. There we go. This is from the transcript on the wall. This is Trump, right? This is the phone conversation that they had, like, a week after he became president, or in the week that he became president. On the wall, you and I both have a political problem. My people stand up and say Mexico will pay for the wall, and your people probably say something similar but slightly different language. I have to have Mexico pay for the wall. I have to. I've been talking about it for a 2-year period. And NATO says, no way. My position has been and will continue to be very firm, saying that Mexico cannot pay for the wall. So then Trump says, but you cannot say that to the press. The press is going to go with that, and I cannot live with that. Oh, my God. This man is our president? It's incredible. I mean, just incredible. I don't know how to say it beyond that. There's so much in the news today. There's so much for us to cover today. And, if you have thoughts or comments you want to share, feel free to give us a shout. Brian Pruitt is going to drop by a little later on. It should be an interesting conversation. And, but I want to start out with Missouri. Missouri is arguably, the Missouri Compromise. I think you could draw a straight line from John Quincy Adams going back into the House of Representatives to, well, actually, this even precedes that. I think you could draw a straight line from, the institution of slavery through the Missouri Compromise to Dred Scott to the Civil War. And so, Missouri was a very, very pivotal state. And when the Missouri Compromise, it was basically they were going to let 2 states into the Union and, we'll make 1 slave and 1 free, right? And that's what a compromise. And when Jefferson learned about this was in 1820. He had been out of the White House since 1808. He died in 1828. He was an old man. He was in his 70s. He was arthritic. He was actually preparing for his death. And when he learned about the Missouri Compromise, that they were going to let Missouri be a slave state, he freaked out because he had spent, and I realize this defies a lot of, conventional bumper sticker wisdom, but he had spent, even though he was a slave owner, had spent much of his life fighting slavery. It was the first piece of legislation he introduced as a young man into the House of Burgesses in Virginia, was to end slavery in Virginia. They punished him by passing a law that if any of his slaves escaped, they would be the wards of the state, or if he freed any of his slaves, they would become wards of the state for 2 years and then subject to resale. So, he got slapped down quite a few times on this. But anyhow, this is, he writes this letter to Congressman John Holmes of Massachusetts. It's April 22nd, 1820, 6 years before his death. And yeah, I thought he died in 1820. Apparently he died in 1826. He says, "I thank you, dear sir, for the copy you have been so kind to send me of the letter to your constituents on the Missouri question. It is a perfect justification to them. I had for a long time ceased to read newspapers or to pay general attention to public affairs, confident they were in good hands, and content to be a passenger in our bark to the shore from which I am not distant." In other words, he's going to take the canoe across the river Styx. He's going to die. Right? A very kind of literary reference. "But this momentous question, like a fire bell in the night, awakened and filled me with terror. I considered it at once as the death knell of the Union. It is hushed indeed for the moment, but this is a reprieve only." See, he's saying, okay, so the Missouri Compromise, but they're continuing slavery. This is going to be a disaster for our country. So he continues, "It is hushed indeed for the moment, but this is a reprieve only, not a final sentence. A geographical line coincided with a marked principle," and this is the line in Missouri, right? "A geographical line coincided with a marked principle, moral and political, once conceived and held up to the angry passions of men, will never be obliterated, and every new irritation will mark it deeper and deeper." And then he went on to say, "But as it is, we have a wolf by the ears, and we can neither hold him nor safely let him go. Justice is on one scale and self-preservation on the other," which I think ultimately was the thinking of most of the slave owners back in those days. And, all the more the tragedy for America. But Missouri is back in the papers with a new draconian bill that so threatens people of color in the United States that the NAACP just issued their first ever national, international warning about traveling to Missouri or living in Missouri. This from Think Progress today by E.A. Crunden. "People of color and other minorities have been warned not to visit the state of Missouri after Republican Governor Eric Greitens signed a draconian bill into law that directly threatens minorities. The organization also advised extreme caution to both travelers and minorities currently living in Missouri." This is SB 43, and basically what it says is that as an employer, you can fire somebody for bigoted reasons. You can fire somebody because they're gay. You can fire them because they're trans. You can fire them because they're black. You can fire them because they're Asian. You can fire Hispanic, whatever you want. See, this is, make America white again, right? This is the whole conservative shtick, Trump shtick, the whole thing. And employees are blocked from suing the individuals responsible for any alleged bias. Only businesses themselves can be sued. It removes whistleblower protections for Missouri state employees. And Missouri NAACP President Nimrod Chappell Jr. has since called the measure a Jim Crow bill, an intentional nod to racial segregation. So this is black students at the University of Missouri have been subject to racial slurs on numerous occasions. A June report indicated that black drivers in the state are 75% more likely to be pulled over than their white counterparts. Chappell says this is the legalization. This is the NAACP president in Missouri. They're legalizing discrimination in the state of Missouri. Now, Texas is getting ready to pass similar legislation, or actually, I guess has, because of the passage of SB 4 in Texas. Well, actually, it's not so similar. This is legislation that targets so-called sanctuary cities. They issued a travel advisory back on May 9th about that. So it's like, it's back. Anyway, it's troubling. It's troubling. Steve Miller yesterday had a meltdown in a press conference with Jim Acosta and just, went off on how the Statue of Liberty, the little plaque, the Colossus, the new Colossus poem, was not actually part of the Statue of Liberty. We got the Statue of Liberty in the 1890s. The new Colossus poem was added a decade later, thereabouts, and doesn't reflect Americans' values, essentially. As Victoria Jones notes in her newsletter this morning, it's a popular refrain among white nationalists. Stephen Miller's comments got an enthusiastic response from white nationalists on Twitter. David Duke, a vocal Trump supporter and former imperial wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, devoted a chapter in one of his books to Emma Lazarus and the Statue of Liberty, saying she wanted to turn America into a refuge for the cast-offs of the world. White supremacist Richard Spencer made a similar point in January on Twitter. Stormfront.org, a popular website among white supremacists, has numerous discussion threads on the subject. The subreddit for President Trump supporters, which frequently pushes white nationalist memes, also has a post titled, "Does anyone realize the poem inscribed beneath the Statue of Liberty is not in fact law?" Another of Miller's tangential arguments, which didn't seem to make any sense to the people in the press room. So strange goings on here. Well, it's not even strange. I mean, this is just how far do they have to go with this dog whistle racist rhetoric before the people in America say, hey, enough, that's not us. I have a horrible feeling that they have a long way to go. Trump is still floating in the high 30s in terms of approval, which is pretty damn shocking. And the ongoing process of basically the deconstruction of a progressive United States, turning us into the Confederate States, raises the question, did the South win?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Because it's sure looking like it. It's like the Republican Party has become the party of the old Confederacy. And welcome back. Jackie, watching Free Speech TV in Port Townsend, Washington. Hey, Jackie, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I wanted to add something to your list about bad things the administration are doing to hurt regular people. Mm-hmm. And I'm in Washington, and the Trump administration has proposed selling the network and wires and substations owned by the Bonneville Power Association, which distributes power to 10 states. Of course, it's a hydroelectric system that was funded by taxpayer money, the Grand Coulee Dam, all that stuff.
Yep.
And right now, large cities and small cities get equal treatment. And if you privatize it, then it goes to maximum returns for the investors, of course.
Right. Everybody's power bills are going to go up in the Pacific Northwest.
And, California, everywhere, 10 states.
Yeah.
And also, my little town of Port Townsend is a welcoming city, which is the same as a sanctuary city, really. And, we could possibly lose grants and this and that, and federal funding. That's what they propose. And
how do you lose grants over privatizing power, or have you moved on to another topic?
Well, I was just saying that another way that they have affected my little area is their threats against sanctuary cities.
Yeah.
So there's two things that's affecting me personally. And I was wondering if you could get Louis Malmadrona back on your show sometime. Maybe he can help us heal.
Yeah, it's been a long time since Louis has been on the air. In fact, it's been a couple of years since I've seen Louis, and Louis is an old friend. He's stayed in our home many times. We've traveled around the world together. We've spoken at a few conferences together, let's say. And I love Lewis, and he's got a new book out, in fact. Well, maybe that was last year, but in the last year or so. But it's been a long time since we've talked, so we should check out what he's up to. But good point. Jackie, is there an organized resistance against the selling off of the Bonneville Dam and that whole, water power system along the Columbia?
Not that I know of. I'm referencing an article in the Seattle Times from July 29th. Mm-hmm. So this is kind of a new issue. Although, boy, we've got a lot of resistance here in our area. Indivisible is huge, and, there's been a lot of people joining the Democratic Party and trying to change things, and so there's a lot of resistance here on many levels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let's hope it gets organized. I remember when we lived in Portland, we could, with the power company there, which is a for-profit utility. They refused to sell it to the city, but they sold it to another for-profit utility when Enron went down. That we could check a box and pay an extra $4 or $5 a month or whatever it was, and know that the electricity that we were using was mostly from Bonneville. It was renewable, and which is kind of ironic that they were charging us more for that because it was cheaper electricity to produce, but. It was a statement. It was the ability to make a statement. And I suspect if this thing gets privatized, a lot's going to. Jackie, thanks for the call. Great to hear from you. We'll be right back.
Hey, what was
Hi there, I'm Marie with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving donations, volunteering, or spreading the word about Free Speech TV, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to exist. And for that, I want to say thank you. Now you can give to the network powered by the people by donating an unwanted or used vehicle through our Vehicles of Change program. If you have an old car, RV, or even a motorcycle, Free Speech TV can use it to grow and thrive. You can make a bigger difference in supporting Free Speech TV by giving an old car. It's a great way to support the network without having to dig into your bank account. Just call 877-378-8669 and ask for more information about Vehicles of Change. Again, the number to call is 877-378-8669. If it has a VIN, we'll take it in. Thank you.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So, we're involved in these long wars in the Middle East, and there's a lot of discussion about, I think this is the longest war that the United States has ever been in. These wars that George W. Bush lied us into in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I mean, he didn't lie us into the one in Afghanistan. We went in cheerfully. After a fair amount of media coaxing. But the fact of the matter is that the Afghan government, Mullah Omar, offered to arrest bin Laden and turn him over to a third country for a trial. And George Bush said, nah, I'd rather bomb your country. And so we're still there 15 years later because George Bush was an idiot who wanted to have a war. And, well, he wasn't an idiot. I'm sorry. I shouldn't call people names. But he was utterly without ethics or honesty. And clearly didn't have a good grasp of foreign policy or what happens when you invade and occupy a country for 15 years. And Don Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney wanted to try out their libertarian experiment. They desperately needed a country. They tried this in Chile. It didn't work with Pinochet. They tried this in the United States. It didn't work with Reaganism. Sam Brownback tried it in Kansas. It didn't work. So they wanted to try it in Iraq. Take down the government altogether and let the wonderful magical marketplace come in and fill that void. So we talk about this long war, but when I opened the show, I was talking about how the NAACP has issued this travel ban in Missouri, or not a ban, a travel warning to people of color about going to Missouri, and it's a long war. I mean, this is the war about slavery that is still going on in the United States. We are still trapped in a battle, a debate around slavery. Now, we don't call it slavery anymore. Now it's Jim Crow, but it's all about the racialization of white power. That's probably a redundant phrase, but I mean, this is, you know, it's the white supremacists and the bigots continuing that war. I was amazed this morning to discover that the Department of Justice was created in the 1880s under Ulysses S. Grant, ostensibly to move forward Reconstruction. But in fact, what it served to do was to stop Reconstruction and institute Jim Crow laws. And so now the Justice Department is being run by Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III. You know, what an irony, and how neatly do those things tie together. So we've got that. In the meantime, Mark Zuckerberg has hired Hillary Clinton's pollster. Yeah, you heard that right. And, or at least the Clinton campaign's pollster, or a pollster who worked with or for the Clinton campaign. And which is causing, and he just did this listening tour where he traveled to, I think, to every state in the union, or a bunch of states, and just kind of showed up and met with people and, hey, I'm your friendly local billionaire, And a lot of people were like, oh, whoa, wow, a billionaire. Oh, yeah. How cool is that? I'm going to talk about great wealth in a little bit, too. But when he was first doing this a couple months back, there were a lot of people going, is he thinking about running for political office? And if so, what political office do you run for in every state? Ding, 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 ding. Yes, there's a billionaire in the White House right now. Oligarchs can become president in this new post-Reagan era. And I mean, it used to be the oligarchs simply owned the president, as in Reagan and both Bushes. Now the oligarchs are actually thinking, well, now the oligarchs have actually become president. Is this really what we want? Is this the kind of country that we are, that we think that oligarchy is like the way to go? There's just a remarkable piece in the Washington Post. It was a few days ago in the Washington Post about great wealth and the impact that great wealth has on people. The title of it is, it's by Charles Matthews and Evan Sandsmark. Being rich wrecks your soul. We used to know that. And he goes back, he starts out, with Rome and Mr. Potter and A Wonderful Life and whatnot. And then he says, over the past few years, a pile of studies from behavioral sciences all say more or less being rich is really bad for you. Wealth, it turns out, leads to behavioral and psychological maladies. And I'll continue this list when we come back from the break. But these are the dangers of great wealth, and I think that they're all on display in the Trump presidency. I don't know Mark Zuckerberg. I don't know that much about him. Never saw the movie, but and let the people decide and all that. But still, billionaires for president? Really?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
After George Bush and Dick Cheney sold us on the idea of multimillionaire CEOs as president, remember the CEO presidency? Now we have a billionaire as presidency. You ready to have another? We're reading today from the Thom Hartmann Reader here at Thom Hartmann University. This is from page 13. The title is The Story of Carl. Carl loved books and he loved history. After spending 2 years in the Army as part of the American occupation forces in Japan immediately after World War II, Carl was hoping to graduate from college and teach history, perhaps even at the university level, if he could just hang on to the GI Bill and his day job long enough to get his PhD. But in 1950, when he'd been married just a few months, the surprise came that forced him to drop out of college. His wife was pregnant with their first child. This was an era when husbands worked, wives tended the home, and being a good father and provider was one of the highest callings to which a man could aspire. Carl dropped out of school, kept his 9-to-5 job at a camera shop, got a second job at a metal fabricating plant, working with molten metal from 7 p.m. to 4 a.m. For much of his wife's pregnancy and his newborn son's first year, he slept 3 hours a night and caught up on the weekends. But in the process, he earned enough to get them an apartment and prepare for the costs of raising a family. Over the next 45 years, he continued to work in the steel and machine industry. In the later years, as a bookkeeper manager for a Michigan tool and die company, as 3 more sons were born. Carl knew he was doing the right thing when he took that job in the factory, and he did it enthusiastically. Because the auto industry was unionized, he found he was able to support his entire family, all 4 sons, on 1 paycheck. He had a fully funded health insurance program, an annual vacation, and a good pension waiting for him when he retired. Carl had become a member of the middle class. He may not have achieved his personal dream of teaching history, but he had achieved the American dream. He was self-sufficient and free. Working with molten metal can be dangerous, but the dangers were apparent, and Carl took every protection to protect himself so that he could return home safely to his family. What he didn't realize, however, was that the asbestos used at the casting operation was an insidious poison. He didn't realize that the asbestos industry had known for decades that the stuff could kill, but would continue to profitably market it for another 20 years while actively using its financial muscle to keep the general public in the dark and prevent the government from interfering. A couple of years ago, Carl tripped on the stairs and ended up in the hospital with a compression fracture of his spine. He figured that fall had also caused the terrible pain he'd been experiencing in his abdomen and his chest. Doctors, however, discovered that his lungs were filled with mesothelioma, a rare form of lung cancer that is almost always caused by exposure to asbestos. Mesothelioma is terminal, and its victims die by a slow and painful suffocation. Just because some corporation put profit before people, Carl got screwed. I was Carl's first child. My dad faced a painful death, but at least his job in a union shop left him with health care after retirement. Most Americans don't even have that reassurance anymore. More than 45 million Americans don't have health insurance to cover expenses for a serious illness, and 5 million lost their health insurance between 2001 and 2005, which is when I wrote this. And it's not just illness that worries most Americans today. Americans are working more and making less, getting harder and harder to just get by. There's a reason for the pain Americans are suffering. The America my dad grew up in put people for profits. The America we live in now puts profits above people. In my dad's America, 35% of working people were union members who got a living wage, health insurance, and defined benefit pensions. These union benefits lifted all boats because they set the floor for employment. For every union job, there was typically a non-union job with similar pay and benefits, meaning roughly 70% of the American workforce back then could raise a family on a single paycheck. People who were disabled and couldn't work could live on Social Security payments, and the elderly knew that they would have a safe retirement, paid for by pensions, Social Security, and Medicare. The gap between the richest and the poorest had shrunk rather than widened. That America is disappearing fast. The minimum wage is not a living wage. Workers are now expected to pay for their own health insurance and their own retirement. Pension plans are disappearing. 30,000 General Motors employees lost theirs just in 2005, and there's continued talk about privatizing Social Security, the Republicans' grand goal. The safety net is ripping apart, and the results are that the middle class is shrinking. The rich are once again getting richer, and the poor are getting poorer. The inflation-adjusted average annual pay of a CEO went up from $7.7 million to $9.6 million just between 2002 and 2004. Meanwhile, from 2002 to 2004, the inflation-adjusted median annual household income went down from $46,058 to $44,300. In other words, ordinary people's income went down by $1,600, while CEO pay went up by $1.8 million a year. From 2001 to 2005, America has lost 2,800 manufacturing jobs just in 3 years. If you don't count jobs produced by the military-industrial complex, the number of private sector jobs created since 2001 has decreased by 1,160,000. Although 67% of large employees, well, you get where we're going with this. Anyhow, it's the Thom Hartmann Reader. Hey,
Want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just a little breaking news here. This from Vox.com. 2 senior law enforcement officials have told me that the new revelations illustrate why they believe the potential case against Trump is stronger than outsiders have thought. A senior law enforcement official said, this is a senior law enforcement official talking to senior people within the FBI. What you are going to have is the potential for a powerful obstruction case. You're going to have the former FBI director testify, and then the acting director, and then the chief of staff to the FBI director, the FBI's general counsel, and then others, one right after another. This has never been the word of Trump against what James Comey has to say. This is more like the Federal Bureau of Investigation versus Donald Trump. So get over to the official Mike Pence website to see what life is going to be like in America after Donald Trump is taken down. That officialmikepence.com is the website, and it's pretty shocking. There's some fascinating stuff there, but don't share it with your children. Officialmikepence.com. So anyhow, back to being rich. This is really quite remarkable. This is the piece by Charles Matthews and Evan Sandsmark in the Washington Post. It was published July 28th, last week. Being rich wrecks your soul. We used to know that, is the headline. He says, when it comes to a broad range of vice, and every single one of these suggestions is backed up by actual research. And the links to the research are in the article. Every single one of them. When it comes to a broad range of vices, the rich outperform everybody else, they write. They are much more likely than the rest of humanity to shoplift and cheat. They're more likely to be adulterers. They're more likely to drink a great deal. They're even more likely to take candy that is meant for children. Mercedes and Lexuses are more likely to cut you off than Hondas and Fords. People who drive expensive cars, more prone to run stop signs and cut off other motorists. The rich are the worst tax evaders, and as the Washington Post has detailed, they are hiding vast sums from public scrutiny in secret overseas bank accounts. They also give proportionally less to charity, not surprising, since they exhibit significantly less compassion and empathy towards suffering people. Is this starting to sound like the Trump family to you? Or, any other billionaire oligarchs that you may happen to know? This is, by the way, not all billionaires are bizarre like this. There are some people who can handle great wealth. But this is how, love of money is the root of all evil. Wealth corrupts, right? This is almost absolute power, massive wealth. Studies also find that members of the upper class are worse than ordinary folks at reading people's emotions and far more likely to be disengaged from the people with whom they're interacting. In other words, instead of actually listening to somebody, instead of actually carrying on a conversation with them, they're checking their phone, they're tapping their pencil on the doodling. Some studies go even further, suggesting that rich people, especially stockbrokers and venture capitalists, who we once called robber barons, are more competitive, impulsive, and reckless than medically diagnosed psychopaths. And by the way, these vices do not make them better entrepreneurs. They just have mommy and daddy's bank accounts in New York or the Cayman Islands to fall back on when they fail, which is certainly, I would say, true of Donald Trump. Simply being around great material wealth makes people less willing to share. These very, very wealthy people also have a hard time enjoying simple things, savoring the everyday experiences that make life so worthwhile. Because they have lower levels of empathy, they have fewer opportunities to practice acts of compassion, which studies suggest give people a great deal of pleasure. They believe that they deserve their wealth, thus dampening their capacity for gratitude, a quality that has been shown to significantly enhance our sense of well-being. And then they ask the question, how did we lose sight of this ancient wisdom about wealth, especially given all these studies from the psychological literature proving the corrosive, destructive influence of great wealth? And I think that, and then the article kind of goes back to, it doesn't explicitly call out Reagan, but it points to that point in time, basically, when we started down this path of celebrating wealth. And I remember the old TV show Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. And all of a sudden, during the 80s, during the Reagan era, we were celebrating riches. You recall, those of you old enough to remember, you recall, in 1976, Jimmy Carter walked from the Capitol building to the White House for his inauguration. He walked in front of everybody. Reagan went in his limousine. Carter had people's balls, very low expense, very open access, you know, to dance and celebrate his inauguration that night. Reagan said, no, we're going to charge big bucks. You know, only our major donors are going to come, and you got to dress to the nines. You know, black tie and all that kind of stuff. And that was the beginning. That was the beginning of the celebration of massive wealth in the United States. So do we want Mark Zuckerberg or any other generic billionaire to be our next president? I'm inclined to say no. I would rather have, you know, another Dwight Eisenhower. Hell, I'd rather have Richard Nixon than Donald Trump. Richard Nixon at least understood how the world works. He understood politics. He had some understanding of economics. Yeah, he was corrupt, but he couldn't hold a candle to Donald Trump, in my opinion. So anyhow, let's pick up some of your calls here. Ali in Las Vegas, Nevada. Hey, Ali, what's up?
What is going on? It's very good to hear from you. Very good to hear the show today. Thanks so much for taking my call.
Sure.
Talking about rich people, I don't think, and I can just speak for me, I don't have a problem with the rich person being president. I really, really don't. It is what it is. They're rich. What I have a problem with is I have a list. A narcissistic, illiterate, ignorant, bigoted, and internationally uninformed person, I don't care how much money they have or don't have. This is what's wrong with Donald Trump. It's not his money. It's just that he's a dumbass.
Yeah, but the fact of the matter is that as a dumbass, he wouldn't have gotten to where he is if his father hadn't given him all this money. So the money has facilitated his dumbassery, for lack of a better word.
Oh my God. And I totally agree with you, Tom. It's one of the reasons why he's so attractive to his base.
Yeah. Because
he's rich, they think that, well, I'm going to model my whole life after this man, and I'm going to have everything that he has.
Yeah,
so
what's the old saying? This is... I'm sorry, go ahead.
He stole from the American people by avoiding paying taxes and avoiding paying contractors and avoiding paying his employees to get that way.
Yeah.
You know, and that's part of the reason he has followers. Again, Barack Obama is rich. He was a great president.
Yeah. Yeah, although he was not born to great wealth, see, so that's, and he's not, I would say Barack Obama is not rich by the standards of today's billionaires. He's probably worth $20–30 million. That's nothing. I mean, you know, compared to like the Koch brothers at $80 billion, you know, I mean, that's $80,000 million. It's like, that's beyond mind-boggling. I mean, that's bigger than you know, some states. And it's not just the Koch brothers, obviously. There's a whole bunch of them, but I think that they're right up there at the top, the Walton family as well. But, you know, to a certain extent, it's the old saying from the 1980s where, you know, when they were trying to figure out why these Democrats were voting for Ronald Reagan, what they found was that a lot of them, because Reagan was promoting the worldview of very wealthy people. And so they say to working class Democrats, why are you supporting Reagan? And basically what they said is, I don't think of myself as a working class person. I think of myself as a billionaire who is temporarily, or a multimillionaire who is temporarily inconvenienced. I'm simply waiting for the lottery ticket to happen, you know, or waiting for the job to drop out of the sky that's going to make me fabulously rich so that I can be on Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. So that, you know, yeah, I think that's the thinking of a lot of these folks. Ali, thank you so much for the call and for your comments. Spot on. Spot on. Kurt in Beverly Hills, California. Hey, Kurt, what's up?
Hey, Tom. How are you today, sir?
I am well. What's up with you?
Well, I wanted to get to your question at the top of the hour. Has the South won? And I believe yes, and that's something I've been trying to warn people about since 2014 when I noticed a lot of other chicanery going on and the rise of the Tea Party and all that stuff. And also, I've missed your show in the last couple of days. I've had it in the background, but I finished up a couple of days of summer school, so my schedule kind of changed. But have you heard that Jeff Beauregard Sessions is thinking about or has sent out a notice to attorneys across the country to challenge the affirmative action admissions program at colleges.
Yeah, they have a help wanted ad. They're looking to hire a lawyer who wants to sue on behalf of white people who think they've been discriminated against. It is bizarre. I mean, affirmative action not only has helped bring, first of all, it's important to note that 1/8 of citizens of the United States live in states like California and Texas where affirmative action is banned. So number one. So this is something that doesn't affect everybody in the United States. Number two, where affirmative action has been allowed to work, and the Supreme Court affirmed this last year, it not only provides bootstraps essentially to people of color by and large, or people who are disadvantaged, but it also is better for even the upper class white people who are going to college to be interacting with people who are not from their racial, social, and economic background. It's a good thing, and it's just it makes me crazy that this is just dog whistle stuff, Kurt.
Yeah, well, it makes you crazy. It makes me crazy also, but from a different perspective. If someone were to go back and look at history, there are some things that occur. The reason why we have affirmative action in school, well, the reason I think it may be different, but one of the reasons I feel it exists is because one of the first overt acts by the Ku Klux Klan in 1865 after the Civil War, one of the first overt acts,
burning schools,
burn an a all black elementary school somewhere in Florida, as an act of it was built, I think, by the freedmen, the freed slaves.
Yeah, and this was an act of terrorism.
Right. They burned it down because it was in their mind. It's like it wasn't good enough or bad enough for them. I don't know how you want to explain it. That slavery had ended, but it's like, I'd be damned if we're going to let the Negro become educated.
Exactly.
Why?
Right, and now Betsy DeVos is burning those schools down, only using lawyers and words like choice instead of torches. Joe Madison has for years been saying, it's not Jim Crow, it's James Crow ESQ, and that's exactly what's going on. They're using new high-tech tools to do arguably the same thing. It's not as severe as slavery, although tell that to the people in prison, actually. In many cases, it is. Kurt, thank you for the call. Well said. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls, my thoughts, and the news of the day right after this. Welcome back. If my dumbass comment offended anybody, my apologies. I will not say it again. Let's see here. Sean in Missoula, Montana. Hey, Sean, what's on your mind today?
It's Don, but what's on my mind is get over it. Donald Trump was elected. He's our president. Quit running him down.
Why?
If we'd have done this to Barack Obama, we wouldn't.
Why should I quit running down Donald Trump?
Why quit running him down?
Yeah, he didn't win the election. He got 3 million fewer votes than Hillary Clinton did.
Oh, get over it.
Why?
How do you know he got 3 million votes? Because somebody illegally is voting in California? Get over it. It's
because it got counted, Sean. No, you can't. You're not going to change my mind with BS like that. With nonsense like that.
Well,
Sean, get over it.
Because the Electoral College is the Electoral College.
Your candidate lost the actual election.
Well,
yes, he won the Electoral College, which was an institution put into place to preserve slavery. 7 out of the last 8 elections.
So it's all about slavery. What it's about is, if you're letting 1 million people a year come into this country, that's the state of Montana. Why can't, and I know lots of people, because I'm now traveling full time, because I worked hard all my life, and I'm traveling full time, and you can't believe how many people I know that would want a job, but they're being undercut by foreigners that come into this country.
Okay.
MSNBC or something just did a big thing on all the big factories now that are being built in Tennessee and Georgia. They're all being built by foreign workers. Why?
They're being built by foreign companies. And the reason why is because our trade policies ever since Reagan have been insane. Republican trade policies, and every single one of these trade deals, by the way, were passed with a majority support of Republicans in the House and Senate, and majority opposition of Democrats. Every single one of them, without exception.
The House and Senate more than
every single one of those. And those trade deals have allowed those companies to export our jobs overseas. And yes, you're absolutely right. There is a dilution of our labor force by immigrants. But that doesn't mean that you stop immigration. It means you get smart about it, which is why I said yesterday, you know, other than Trump's trying to dial the number of legal immigrants that we allow into this country from 1 million back to 500,000, I think that going to a skill-based system is not a terrible idea.
Yeah, well, he's our
president. No, I didn't hear what you were saying when you were talking over me, Sean. Did you say anything consequential?
You were talking over me. You know, as a host, you should let your guest finish what he's speaking about.
Right. Well, Sean, when you have your radio show, you know, you can invite me to call in, and then you can talk over me all you want. But
I come across you
as I tried to give you an opportunity to say, did you say anything of consequence?
You're a bunch of morons. Hey, get over it. Donald Trump won, and I hope he cleans house. There's so many crooked people there that if it was Hillary with Benghazi, and I know firsthand about Benghazi, there's not anywhere in the world we can't be there with less than an hour. Yeah, you laugh.
I love it.
So
this is all you've got, Sean?
When shift happens, okay, well, laugh at me, but I'm going to laugh at you sooner or later.
That's fine. This is all you've got. Benghazi, really?
Oh well, how about
after the Republicans cut funding for the State Department security at Benghazi, you're complaining about it?
Gave the soul to Russia.
Incredible, Sean. Thanks for the call. Good talking with you. We'll be back. It's coming up on 9 minutes before the end. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Bud in Paso Robles, California. Hey, Bud, what's on your mind?
Yeah, Tom. Where did it specifically say in that ad about attorneys to represent white people that you quoted?
I don't have the ad in front of me, Bud. But you can look at the New York Times, the Washington Post, or pretty much any, Drudge. Oh. I mean, pick your website. Everybody is saying essentially the same thing, which is that they are looking for.
Tom, do you remember when this lawsuit was filed on behalf of these? I believe I don't know what the politically correct word is for Orientals or Chinese or Far Easterns, but anyway,
Asians.
This lawsuit was filed against Harvard in 2015 because Harvard put a cap on the number of Oriental people admitted to the college there. And, Tom, President Obama didn't do nothing for a year. He just sat on it and passed it over to Mr. Trump. And now...
But I don't know what you're talking about. This effort to undo affirmative action is nothing more than a shout out to Donald Trump's white racist base. It is purely that. Bud, thanks for the try, but ain't buying it. Linda in Jefferson City, Missouri. Speaking of Missouri, hey Linda, what's up?
Hello, can you hear me?
Just fine.
Okay, great. I was going to talk about the stuff that was going on in Missouri. It's pretty hard to be a Democrat in a blood red state, but we try hard. Mm-hmm. I was just commenting about, how I think Missouri has become the new Mississippi, Alabama, mm-hmm. because after Michael Brown died, there was this march by a bunch of people coming up to Jefferson City, and there were people in our state that threw watermelon in front of the people that were marching and fried chicken. The guy that killed Michael Brown, his defense was paid for by the Missouri Ku Klux Klan. They were jeered. We are the new Mississippi, Alabama. We're the heart of racism.
Wow. That's your sense of it, living there.
Yes.
So is there any kind of, Linda, is there any kind of organized pushback or anything?
Well, I think sometimes it's almost like, it's not like it's organized, but it's just like you have people of faith and people of goodwill who are just going to do the right thing because it's the right thing.
Right.
And it's not going to be overt, and it's not going to be broadcast because of the fear of retribution. But I just think from what the people that I know and the people that I associate with, it's more about people of good faith just doing the right thing because it's the right thing.
Yeah. Well, that's what we need. Linda, thanks for the call and for the heads up. That's interesting to hear from somebody from Missouri. I appreciate it. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind?
Yeah, hey, Tom. I kind of have a Washington question for you. And I'm only asking this because of the interaction between Jim Acosta and that Stephen K. Miller guy, and the emphasis that the FIRE organization, Freedom of Individual Rights and Education, the emphasis they put on Washington. Like, they believe, we had a controversy, and I think you did a show on it, I'm not sure, where the FIRE institution believes that in Washington, conservatives are really suppressed. All right. Now, that really caught my attention, last year when that happened. But this Jim Acosta and Stephen K. Miller interaction, specifically when Jim Acosta told Stephen K. Miller, he said, what? Do you only want people from English-speaking people from Australia and the United Kingdom immigrating to the United States? And Jim Acosta said something that sounds like racial engineering. And Stephen K. Miller, I almost detected like a cognitive tick, where he was going to say something, then he turned around and saw an opportunity to accuse Jim Acosta,
right,
ironically, of being racist.
Right, and I think he was thinking about the one guy who was watching that show that he was actually performing for, and that was Donald Trump.
But is that not creepy?
Yeah.
I mean,
it's extremely creepy. But Stephen Miller, apparently from a troubled childhood, to this point has been, and I don't know Stephen Miller, so I'm reluctant to specifically go off on him, but he's very good at playing the victim card. There's a lot of conservative snowflakes out there right now, because essentially what Steve Miller said to the CNN reporter Acosta was, "Oh my God, you just offended me. How dare you?" It's like, I'm going to melt. And yeah, and at the same time, he's trying to gaslight him. It's just blowing smoke. So yeah, Dave, thanks for the call. Thanks for listening to Sirius XM. It's a fascinating day. It's a fascinating, I've said this before, but it bears repeating, I suppose. I never really, in most of my life, understood why the old Chinese curse, "May you live in interesting times," was considered a curse. I now understand it. We'll be back. Brian Pruitt's going to drop by. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from the Thom Hartmann Reader, and this is from page 39, chapter titled An Informed and Educated Electorate. The epigraph, the quote that opens the chapter, is from Thomas Jefferson. If a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be. Whenever the people are well informed, however, they can be trusted with their own government, that whenever things get so far wrong as to attract their notice, they may be relied upon to set them right. Into the chapter. Talk radio news service based in Washington, D.C. is owned and run by my dear friend Ellen Ratner. Ellen is an experienced and accomplished journalist, and a large number of interns and young journalism school graduates get their feet wet in reporting by working for her. In March 2010, I was in Washington for a meeting with a group of senators, and I needed a studio from which to do my radio and TV show. Ellen was gracious enough to offer me hers. I arrived as three of her interns were producing a panel discussion type of TV show for web distribution at talkmedianews.com, in which they were discussing for their viewing audience their recent experiences on Capitol Hill. One intern panelist related that a White House correspondent for one of the big three TV networks had told her that the network registered a huge amount of interest in the hot story that week of a congressman's sexual indiscretions. Far less popular were stories about the debates on health care, the conflicts in the Middle East, and even the Americans who had died recently in Iraq or Afghanistan. The intern said, so that's the story they have to run with on the news, relating the substance of the network's correspondents' thoughts, because that's what the American people want to see. If the network doesn't give people what they want to see, viewers will tune away and the network won't have any viewers, ratings, or revenues. The other two interns commiserated with the first about what a shame it was that Americans wanted the titillating stories instead of the substantive ones, but they accepted without question that the network was therefore obliged to, quote, give people what they want, end quote. When they finished their panel discussion, I asked these college students if they knew that there was a time in the United States when radio and TV stations and news networks broadcast the actual news instead of infotainment because the law required them to. None of them had any idea what I was talking about. But the reality is that from the 1920s, when radio really started going big in the United States, until Reagan rolled it back in 1987, federal communications law required a certain amount of public service programming from radio and television stations as a condition of retaining their broadcast licenses. The agreement was basic and simple. In exchange for the media owners being granted a license from the Federal Communications Commission to use their airwaves, owned by the public, they had to serve the public interest first, and only then could they go about the business of making money. If they didn't do so, when it came time to renew their license, public groups and individuals could show up at public hearings on the license renewal and argue for the licenses being denied. One small way that stations lived up to their public service mandate was by airing public service announcements for local nonprofit groups, community calendars, and other charitable causes. They also had to abide by something called the Fairness Doctrine, which required them to air diverse viewpoints on controversial issues. Separately, during election campaigns, broadcasters had to abide by the equal time rule, which required them to provide equal airtime to rival candidates in any election. But the biggest way that they proved that they were providing a public service and meeting the requirements of the Fairness Doctrine was by broadcasting the news, real news, actual news, local, national, and international news produced by professional old-school journalists. Because the news didn't draw huge ratings like entertainment shows, although tens of millions of Americans did watch it every night on TV and listen to it at the top of every hour on radio from coast to coast. And because real news was expensive to produce, with bureaus and correspondents all over the world. News was a money loser for all of the big three TV networks and for most local and radio and national radio, and TV stations. But it was such a sacred thing. This was, after all, the keystone that held together the station's license to broadcast and thus to do business. It didn't matter if it lost money. It made all the other money-making things possible. Through much of the early 1970s, I worked in the newsroom of a radio station in Lansing, Michigan. It had been started and was then run by three local guys, an engineer, a salesman, and a radio broadcaster. They split up the responsibilities like you expect, and all were around the building most days and would hang out from time to time with the on-air crew, all except the sales guy. I was forbidden from talking with him because I worked in news. There could be no hint, ever, anywhere, that our radio station had violated the FCC's programming in the public interest mandate by, for example, by going easy on an advertiser in a news story or promoting another advertiser in a different story. News had to be news, separate from profits and revenue. And if it wasn't, I'd be fired on the spot. News, in other words, wasn't part of the free market. It was part of our nation's intellectual commons, and thus the price of the station's license. After Reagan blew up the Fairness Doctrine in 1987, two very interesting things happened. The first was the rise of right-wing hate speech talk radio, starting with Rush Limbaugh that very year. The second, which really stepped up after President Bill Clinton signed the Telecommunications Act of '96, was that the money-losing news divisions of the big three television networks were taken under the wings of their entertainment divisions and wrung dry. Foreign bureaus were closed, reporters were fired, stories that promoted the wonders of advertisers owned by the same mega corporations began to appear, and investigative journalism began to die. It's the Thom Hartmann Reader.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you in the studio with me. I'm very, very pleased to have Brian Pruitt, contributor to redstate.com. Redstate.com is the website. You can tweet Brian at BRYANPRUITT, Brian Pruitt.
Thanks, Tom.
Or at Redstate. Hey, Brian, welcome back.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
Great having you. I wanted to talk with you about the how conservatives understand Donald Trump. And in fact, actually, let's expand this a little bit. How conservatives understand is the wrong word. The conservative perspective on the Trump presidency, shall we say.
Engage.
Versus, yeah.
They engage.
Yeah, versus the base's understanding of the Trump presidency versus the institutional Republican Party's understanding of the Trump presidency. You're familiar with all three of these groups.
Absolutely.
So what's your sense of what's going on in the Republican Party in thoughtful conservative circles and then among, you know, the base?
The easiest one to start out with is the establishment conservatives. Mm-hmm. They are now, after he won the election, they are using Trump as a conduit to power and to get some things done, to maintain majorities, to move some pieces of legislation, just to sort of maintain their power base in Washington, D.C. I think that's the easiest one. And that's the wide swath of Republican Washington right now. Well, and they embraced the candidate that won, legitimately won, and now they're going to try and use the candidate or the president to help advance some sort of victories. You know, they've spent 8 years promising the American people that they would repeal and replace Obamacare. Obviously, that went up in flames for multiple reasons that we can talk about later or at a different time. But I believe the establishment Republicans are using the president as a conduit.
So as an example of that, Brian Zinke running around talking about privatizing Western lands, selling them off to the Koch Industries or whatever. And
I don't think that's what all Republicans want to do, but yes, that's what.
Yeah, I mean the donor class, right? Sure. And Brian, not Brian Pruitt, Scott Pruitt, excuse me.
Sure.
Respectfully,
definitely, there's a lot of that on the EPA, on the deregulation side.
You guys are not related, by the way, are you?
No, we're not. Okay. No, not at all related.
That's reassuring.
He's from Oklahoma. I'm from Kansas.
Okay. Oh, really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, cool.
Wichita.
So yeah, oh, that's it's a great town.
It is.
So
The conservatives,
so
to take the second group, the conservatives, and we say conservative first, Republican second, because that's the party by which conservatism sort of advances its cause, and that's I'm a conservative. Conservatives are obviously upset. Obviously he wasn't our candidate in the primary. Everyone continues to admit that Donald Trump was a Democrat and at the very least is a big government Republican. He said, and I presume he will keep this promise, that nothing will happen with anyone's Medicare. Nothing will happen with Medicaid, which is bankrupting states left and right, and the federal government because of all the subsidies that the federal government has to give states to maintain this massive expansion of Medicaid under Obamacare. Conservatives they don't know where to go. So they're going to try and change the Republican Party from the inside over the next 4 years. So what does that look like? That looks like more conservatives running for maintaining the conservative base in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, but also electing more conservatives in Republican primaries. So that means really making sure that the primary process is competitive for conservatives. That's where organizations like the Senate Conservatives Fund comes in. Really funding the Club for Growth, candidates that are going to be conservatives, not conservative Republicans, not Trump Republicans.
Right. Have you ever read Conscience of a Conservative?
I have not, unfortunately. It wasn't on the college reading list.
Let me recommend it, actually. Barry Goldwater's book. I've read it twice. I also read his second autobiography, No Apologies, I'm pretty sure, which is a brilliant book also.
Let's remember that conservative Republicans believe in small government.
Well, this is where I'm going with this. I want to get to a definition of conservatives, because if you read Conscience of a Conservative, Goldwater made it quite clear that any party, in his mind, any party that was basically a toady to wealth was not conservative.
Sure.
That they were merely shills for wealth. And I think that the idea of putting in Scott Pruitt into the EPA or putting Ryan Zinke into the Interior Department with the explicit goal of simply making life easier or more profitable for oligarchs in the United States and big businesses in the United States would have made Barry Goldwater vomit. I don't understand what people mean anymore when they say conservative. And I grew up in a conservative household. I had read John Stormer. By the time I was, I went door to door for Barry Goldwater.
Right.
And when I was 14 years old, sure. Brian, I understand this stuff.
I can tell you exactly what it means. And it means a level playing field. It means no crony capitalism. It means that you don't go into Congress trying to elect people that are going to create regulations, more regulations to benefit big business versus small business. Things like creating a code in the federal government for procurement that only allows gigantic companies with hundreds of lawyers that know how to write these proposals for OPM. So basically small businesses that should be the engine of our government procurement process are blocked out because they don't fill out the right form or they don't get it in on deadline X. That's what conservatives are talking about.
That's not...
Those are all...
You're going to find liberals absolutely agree with you on that.
All those processes, but liberals love deadlines. They love you have to cross every T, dot every I.
Where's that in the liberal theology?
I think it's the outgrowth of the regulatory state.
Well, the regulatory state, I would argue. In fact, I wrote a book called Unequal Protection. There's a whole chapter in there about how the George H.W. Bush administration, Monsanto came to them and said, we've developed, during the last 2 years of the Reagan administration, they developed the technology to genetically modify plants. And there were no regulations around it. And they came to George Bush, the senior, and said, we need regulations for this. And the implication was we need regulations so that we can lock this up. We want the equivalent of a patent or a trademark. And Bush was like, sure, we'll do this.
Sure. And I absolutely will concede the fact that during the late 80s and early 90s, Republicans who claimed to be conservative tried to rig the system.
Well, isn't it that
that's not what the current conservative movement is?
It seems to me like in the context of both on the left and the right. I mean, the Democratic Party went through this dark night of the soul with the Democratic Leadership Council, the DLC. and you know, of, hey, let's become a party of corporate America, only we'll choose the bankers instead of the oil companies. And the Republicans said, okay, we'll take the oil companies, and you guys have the bankers. And that, I mean, that was the 90s, right? And it's so the net of this is that big money has infected, to a certain extent, both parties, and I think damaged both parties in a really big way.
The last piece of being a conservative, just very quickly, because I want to get to the third one, the base, which is most important. No, that's okay. I don't know how much time we have, but I'll be more than happy to talk for as long as possible. The last little piece on knowing conservatives and how they interact with the Trump presidency is that conservatives fundamentally believe, and unfortunately we haven't done a good job in messaging this, is that we want to be able to take care of the least of us. And that means creating a social safety net that really takes care, that is able to support the absolute least of us, the people that need help to survive.
And why do you have 6 Republican-run states that are right now trying to pass legislation to drug test people on Medicaid?
Well,
that's got nothing to do with least or not least. It's just it's just humiliating people. People on Medicaid are far less likely than you know, middle-class people like you and me to use drugs.
The analogy I'll use for that is you and I often disagree about voter ID, but the fact is, you know, you should be able to produce a piece of an ID that proves you are who you are to vote. If you're on public assistance, I think we're generally agreed that you probably, if your goal is to get out of welfare and into the workforce and contributing to society, drug use probably is not a good thing to be doing. And so I think but
that's not the spirit in which this is being done, Brian. You know that.
I disagree. I disagree with you on that. I don't believe people have it in their hearts
to
punish people.
So we're going to say to people, you are sick, you are poor, you need medical services, and in fact, you have a serious sickness, an addiction. And because of that serious sickness, we're going to cut you off from all health care.
Well,
how is that conservative? How is that even human?
I don't think something like an addiction that would be covered under the American with Disabilities Act, something like a heroin addiction or something, or any
if you
sort of
fail a drug test, I mean, if
I don't,
we've kind of wandered afield.
I don't think that particular regulation would survive a court test under the AIM.
Okay, you wanted to get to the base.
The final piece of the Trump coalition, if that's what you want to call it, how he got elected, is this base, the Trump base, which I think everyone in Washington, D.C. is trying to struggle to understand, because no one in Washington, D.C. has taken time to understand both the Republicans and the Democrats. There were a lot of Democrats, Obama Democrats, in fact, that ended up voting for Trump because they feel completely betrayed by the Republicans, one, who didn't keep any of these promises that they made since 2010 when they took over Congress. And they feel betrayed by the Democrats, because the Democrats are worried about everybody but them. If you pay attention to the messaging coming out of the Democratic Party and the campaign committees and all sort of superstructure that exists to support Democrats, none of it, zero, has anything to do with white, moderate to conservative, working class people.
And yet
and that, by the way, is not just in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania.
I get
that's
that.
in upstate New York.
That demo mostly went for Hillary Clinton. It was people earning over $100,000 that were the main demo for Donald Trump.
That's not necessarily
White
true.
People earning over $100,000.
Not in Midwestern states. Not in Midwestern states. That's the data come out of.
You said that the Republican Party, the conservative first, Republican second. And I think that that's a really important and consequential thing. I don't know of any Democrats who are willing to say, I'm a liberal first and a Democrat second.
And maybe.
And I believe that's why the Democratic Party, in part, loses elections.
If both parties don't do something, I'm starting to develop an opinion that if the Republicans don't do something to deliver for the country, that Trump may very well be on his way to creating a third party surrounding his cult of personality. On the Democratic side, I believe if the Democratic Party doesn't come together to address these issues for America, you're going to see a cataclysmic split. Like, there will be two Democratic parties. I don't see the inertia.
DLC party and the Liberal Party.
I don't see the inertia for that, but just a party that rips itself apart.
Yeah.
It would be losing election.
I think in both cases, with either party. Brian Pruitt, hang on just a second. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
You can tweet Brian at Brian Pruitt, Bryan Pruitt, and you can read his work at redstate.com. I got to go back on here. And welcome back. You can go under it or over it or whatever. It's all good. Hobart in Pearlington, Mississippi, watching us on Free Speech TV. You're on the air. What's up?
I want to talk about unnecessary wars.
Okay, go for it.
You were talking about W's war, which I don't think it was a libertarian experiment. I think it was a brilliant move to inflate the price of oil. But that's not the war I want to talk about.
Yeah, I believe that that's how it started out, Holbert. They and that was Dick Cheney's first job was to carve up Iraq even before we started talking about invading them. But that's not what you want to talk about. What do you want to talk about?
About a month ago, I saw a thing on the History Channel. Well, I think it was the History Channel about Amelia Earhart.
Yeah.
And it dropped some bombshells.
How so?
One that I've read a book on this about 43 years ago, and I went to my brother's house where the book is, and I've retrieved it, and I looked it up, and it verifies most of what this History Channel show said.
Which was?
That, when we invaded Saipan in 1944, a pair of Marines were sent to dig up Amelia Earhart's and Fred Noonan's remains and remove them. Of course, there were still plenty of witnesses left in the Marshall Islands, and I think someone in Saipan that had seen them. So the book says this, and so did the series. But of course, the U.S. government wanted to conceal the fact that they were ever there.
Why?
Because they knew they were there already, and of course, the way they found out was they had broken the Japanese military code by 1937.
So we found this out by tuning into the Japanese, but why would we want to hide the fact that we knew where Amelia Earhart was? I don't understand.
They were trying to conceal the fact that they knew the Japanese had them, because the means that we used to find this out was we had broken their military code.
Right, but what does that have to do with Amelia Earhart trying to fly an airplane around the world to show that a woman could do it?
I'm trying to get to that.
Okay, please do.
The government was trying to conceal the fact that it knew about the Japanese having Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan prisoner, and of course the way they found this out, well, we had broken their code by 1937, and the fact that we had this code in 1937 instead of 1942, as was the official story, well, I think you can get the ramifications. That code is how we were able to ambush the Japanese fleet at Midway. Now, if we could do this in 1937, we could certainly do it in 1941.
So you're saying that Pearl Harbor
happened deliberately.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
He already. Dusko Popov had already dropped off a full report on it. FDR moved the 7th Fleet from various bases on the West Coast to Pearl Harbor in May of 1940, knowing it, understanding its vulnerability. He did everything he could to provoke Japan. He was arranging World War II.
Well, I would say he was arranging America's involvement in it, if that story is true. And yes, he did close the Straits of Malacca so that Japan was lacking oil. This was a strategic move to cut off their power resources, and that is broad consensus. That's what provoked Pearl Harbor attack. But whether that was what Roosevelt wanted or not, I'm very skeptical. But I get it that that's your perspective. Holbert, thanks for the call. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
Welcome back. Oh, what a fascinating day. Let's see here. Anita in San Antonio. Hey, Anita, what's up? Anita? I'm not hearing Anita. Okay, let's try putting her on hold and going. She's on line 8, Nate. Nancy in Arlington Heights, Illinois. Hey, Nancy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I'm so excited. I've never gotten through before, but I've been listening over 10 years. Love love your show.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. So what I want to talk about is the conflation on the right of the debt and the deficit.
Sure.
They were even doing this a year ago at their convention. But, the deficit's been coming down because of the Affordable Care Act and President Obama's policies, and there was a tax increase in there. So now they have to go after the debt. And you even had a caller, I think it was on Friday, called up and he said, where should we start cutting? And you said, why should we start cutting? He said, well, we have to cut the debt. And they have to justify their cuts to all the programs that help people. So now they're going after the debt. When you're talking about the debt, you're not talking about the deficit.
Yeah.
If you're talking about the deficit, you're not talking about the debt. But they're conflating them as if they're the same thing.
Right. The deficit, for people who are listening, and this might have slid by them, the deficit is the annual shortfall, the difference between government spending and tax revenue. And the debt is the cumulative total of years and years of government shortfall. Our national debt is somewhere in the neighborhood, depending on how you calculate it, whether or not you include money that the government owes itself, which is around $4 trillion right now. 2.6 of that is just Social Security. But the big number is around 20 trillion. It's probably actually around 15 trillion when you back out those numbers. And I think that we need to change our terms, Nancy. Instead of calling it the debt, we should call it private savings, America's savings accounts. And when a bank loans money to somebody, you don't say that bank. Well, actually, I got it backwards. If I go to the bank and I deposit $10,000 in the bank now owes me $10,000. Does that mean they're $10,000 in debt? No, seriously. Because when I buy treasuries, the government now owes me that money. I've got a piece of paper. They have a debt to me, but they're paying interest. It's my savings. So I really think that we need to change the way that we talk about this and the way that we look at it. And that's not going to happen as long as Pete Peterson is pushing his line, but at least not on the Republican side. It's a good one. Nancy, I got to move along, but we're hitting a break here. But thank you for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I want to talk about lead and Chicago, too. Right after. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, and today we're reading from Unequal Protection, How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back. This is from page 98, the subchapter, The Supreme Court Takes Over. As Charles and Mary Beard, they were famous historians in the 1930s, wrote in The Rise of American Civilization, which is their famous historical record of the United States, quote, But the states had to reckon with the Federalist interpretation of the Constitution by John Marshall, who, as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States from 1801 to 1835, never failed to exalt the pro-business doctrines of Hamilton above the claims of the states. Marshall, appointed to the court by Federalist John Adams, who had appointed for life only Federalists to all federal judgeships, was what today would be called a judicial activist. As the Beards wrote, quote, "By historic irony, he, Marshall, administered the oath of office to his bitterest enemy, Thomas Jefferson. And for a quarter of a century after the author of the Declaration of Independence retired to private life, the stern Chief Justice continued to announce old Federalist rulings from the Supreme Bench." In 1803, during the second year of Jefferson's presidency, Marshall took on a power for himself and future Supreme Courts that made President Jefferson apoplectic. In the Marbury v. Madison case, as the Beards related, quote, "Marshall had been in his high post only 2 years when he laid down for the first time, in the name of the entire court, the doctrine that the judges have the power to declare an act of Congress null and void, when in their opinion it violates the Constitution. This power was not expressly conferred on the court by the Constitution. Although many able men have held that the judicial branch of government enjoyed it, the principle was not positively established until 1803 by Marshall's ruling in this case." End of quote. Jefferson, shocked, bluntly expressed his concern to his old friend Judge Spencer Roane, the son-in-law of Patrick Henry and a justice on the Virginia Supreme Court. "If this opinion be sound," Jefferson wrote, "then indeed is our Constitution a complete felo de se, legally a suicide. For intending to establish 3 departments, coordinate and independent, that they might each check and balance one another, this decision has given, according to this opinion, to one of them alone the right to prescribe rules for the government of the others, and to that one too which is unelected by and independent of the nation." Jefferson continued in full fury. "The Constitution on this hypothesis is a mere thing of wax in the hands of the judiciary, which they may twist and shape into any form they please. It should be remembered as an axiom of eternal truth in politics that whatever power in any government is independent is absolute also, in theory only at first while the spirit of the people is up, but in practice as fast as that relaxes. Independence can be trusted nowhere but with the people in mass. They are inherently independent of all but moral law. My construction of the Constitution is very different from that you quote. It is that each department is truly independent of the others and has an equal right to decide for itself what is the meaning of the Constitution in the cases submitted to its action, and especially where it is to act ultimately and without appeal. A judiciary independent of a king or executive alone is a good thing, but independent of the will of the nation is a solecism and a blunder, at least in a Republican government." In his decision, putting the Supreme Court above the elected officials, the legislature and the president, John Marshall was echoing Hamilton's Federalist mistrust of any form of government constrained solely by those elected by the people. Kings had faced challenges, the Federalists argued, and fought back because as kings they could force decisions without having to wait for a consensus of the people. This powerful federal judiciary, only partially answerable to the people, the Federalists believed, was essential to the survival of the nation. As Hamilton wrote in the Federalist Papers in number 23 about whether there should be constraints in the Constitution that would prevent the U.S. government from operating outside the will of its people, quote, "These constitutional powers ought to exist without limitation because it is impossible to foresee or define the extent and variety of national exigencies or the correspondent extent and variety of the means by which may be necessary to satisfy them. The circumstances that endanger the safety of nations are infinite, and for this reason no constitutional shackles can wisely be imposed on the power to which the care of it is committed." Hamilton's argument is essentially what was said by the Bush administration lawyers who argued in their legal briefs for massive increases in presidential powers post 9/11. Madison, as an ally of Jefferson, rebutted Hamilton's worldview, perhaps most eloquently, in the Federalist Papers number 39, when he wrote, "It is essential to such a government that it be derived from the great body of society, not from an inconsiderable proportion or a favored class of it. Otherwise, a handful of tyrannical nobles exercising their oppressions by a delegation of their powers might aspire to the rank of republicans and claim for their government the honorable title of republic." Jefferson further elaborated his arguments for 3 independent and equal in power branches of government, as well in numerous writings during the 1780s as the Constitution was being formed. But that was then, and this was 1803. The deed was done by Marshall, and the Federalists had won. That said, there is no doubt that Marshall, like Hamilton, believed he was doing the best thing for the nation that he had served as a soldier during the Revolutionary War. In the 1819 McCulloch versus Maryland decision, for example, he referenced government deriving all its power from and by the people. Anyway, the book is Unequal Protection.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. You may not have ever heard of Dr. Herbert Needleman, but a week or so ago, or a week and a half ago, July 18th, he died. 2 weeks ago, I guess. He was 89 years old. He was working in North Philadelphia after medical school, working in a community psychiatric clinic. Benedict Carey wrote a great piece about this in the New York Times. It's sort of a eulogy, but it's in the science section. Dr. Herbert Needleman, who saw lead's wider harm to children, dies at 89. And well, I'll just read a little bit of this to you that Benedict Carey wrote. The boy approached. He was working in the community psychiatric clinic in North Philadelphia when he met a young man who had become a touchstone for a crusading career. The boy approached Dr. Needleman and explained his ambitions, which were large, even as the boy struggled with words. He was bright and open. Nonetheless, he had deficits that struck Dr. Needleman as similar to those found in children with lead poisoning. I thought, he said in a later interview, how many of these kids who are coming to the clinic are in fact missed cases of lead poisoning? Now, the problem they had at that point in time was there was no, no easy way to find out exposure to lead. But what they knew is that exposure to high doses of lead caused, again, quoting from the article, mental lapses, even permanent brain damage and death. But what about the low-level exposure? No one knew, right? Nobody knew what the consequences of this were. And there was no easy way to find out how much lead a person had in their body because it ultimately, gets into the body. You ingest it, you inhale it, you breathe it, you eat it, or whatever, and it gets into your bloodstream. But eventually where it ends up is in your skeleton. And doing a biopsy where you drill a hole through, a kid's arm into their bone and pull out a piece of the bone to determine how much lead exposure they've got was, inhumane and painful. So nobody had ever really done the epidemiology. So what Dr. Needleman figured out was that teeth are part of our skeleton. I mean, it is conventional wisdom. He didn't figure this out, but it occurred to him. Teeth are part of the skeleton, and when kids are 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, they're losing their teeth. So he started playing tooth fairy, essentially, saying to parents in this community in was it Pittsburgh or Philadelphia? In Pittsburgh, saying, I'll give you money for your children's teeth. You can play tooth fairy, give the money to your kids. And here's what he found: children living in poor urban neighborhoods had lead levels 5 times higher on average than did their peers in the suburbs. He published a paper in 1979 in the New England Journal of Medicine, which included more than 2,000 children. And they explained the associated consequences in devastating detail, writes Benedict Carey in the New York Times. Children whose accumulated exposure to lead was highest in the group scored 4 points lower on an IQ test than youngsters whose exposure was at the lowest end. Teachers rated the high-exposure children as having a host of classroom issues, including attention deficits and behavior problems. And then they did a follow-up, and there was a correlation between lead levels and reading delays and lead levels. And now we've seen, studies on lead levels in criminality and lead levels in violence. So when you expose children to lead, you are pretty predictably setting up a problem with misbehaving, poor learning, and violent children. Flash over to an article by Michael Hawthorne on February 8th of last year in the Chicago Tribune. Now, keep in mind, this was a year and a half ago. This was made public. The headline, City Fails to Warn Chicagoans About Lead Risks in Tap Water. As Michael Hawthorne writes in the Chicago Tribune on February 8, 2016, More than 2 years after federal researchers, and keep in mind, this is a year and a half ago, more than 2 years after federal researchers found high levels of lead in homes where water mains had been replaced or new meters installed, city officials still do little to caution Chicagoans about potential health risks posed by work that Mayor Rahm Emanuel is speeding up across the city. By the way, this is not a knock on the mayor. This is not. In a peer-reviewed study, researchers at the U.S. EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, found alarming levels of the brain-damaging metal can flow out of household faucets for years after construction work disrupts service lines that connect buildings to the city's water system. Nearly 80% of the properties in Chicago are hooked up to service lines made of lead. And the city, when questioned about water quality, officials said the city complies with the lead and copper rule. This is a 1991 law. But the rule, this federal rule, only requires that 50 homes be tested every 3 years in Chicago, a city of 2.7 million people, with more lead service lines than any other U.S. city. Moreover, the rules require utilities to check only the first liter of water drawn in the morning. Now, here's why that's problematic. The lead is in the service lines. In other words, it's in the water pipes out in the street, right, and in the lines coming up to the house. It's not in the house. So when you first open the tap in the morning and you take your first liter of water out, your first, fraction of a gallon of water out, you're getting the water that was sitting in the copper pipe in the house. You're not getting the water that was sitting in the lead pipe out in front of the house. To get that water, you've got to run your water for a couple minutes and give that water time to move from the street, from the lead pipes in the street, into the house and out the faucet, because it has to displace all the water that's been sitting in the house overnight. So the methodology is screwy. Makes no sense. In fact, he notes in the article, the first liter of water is often lead-free. High levels of the toxic metal can flow through taps for several minutes afterwards. After years of hearings, a group of EPA advisors issued a report in December that concluded the current rule masks widespread but little-known threats to public health. And they say, he writes in the article, the only way to guarantee the public is protected is to make it a national priority to remove lead service lines altogether. This is according to the EPA panel. They wrote a letter to Gina McCarthy, who was the head of the EPA at the time, saying revisions to the rule alone are not sufficient to address this critical issue. The removal of all lead service lines will require significant financial resources and time. During this time, it's essential to have in place a robust effort of consumer education and engagement to ensure protection from exposure to lead in drinking water. And the EPA says any household with lead service lines should flush pipes for 3 to 5 minutes anytime water hasn't been used for several hours. And then they point out toward the end of the article, a 2015 Tribune investigation reveals it remains a pernicious problem, it being lead contamination of water, in the same poor, predominantly African-American neighborhoods in the west and south sides that have given Chicago a national reputation for violence and academic failure. So Dr. Herbert Needleman passes away. He's the guy who woke us up to all this stuff. And, what are we doing about this? Not nearly enough, in my humble opinion. Not nearly enough. Let's pick up your calls here. Alina in Seattle. Am I saying your name right?
Yes. Hi, Tom. Fascinating program. Scary, but very important information. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm calling because we just had a primary in Washington State. As you probably know, Washington State Senate is controlled by Republicans by one vote. Mm-hmm. And this year we have a special election. We can change that. It's district goes to Seattle, 45th legislative district. People there are not as liberal as Seattleites, but they're still pretty good. And the problem is they don't turn out on off-year elections. So in the primary, we have Manka Dhingra running for the first time. She's a Democrat, and she just won by 9 points, which is great.
Wow.
So I just wanted to get the word out, for people to give her money and volunteer.
Right, because the general election, I'm assuming, is in November?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's a great one. And what's her website, Alina?
I don't know.
Okay.
Silly, sorry.
How do you spell her name? I'm unfamiliar with this person. I'm sorry.
You're not. Okay, so Manka is spelled Manka, and Dhingra is spelled Dhingra. She's an immigrant from India.
Oh, great. Okay. Elena, thank you.
So we will, if we have the Senate majority Democrats, we have no filibuster, so they'll be able to conduct liberal agenda.
Right, and this is for the state Senate, and these are important elections. You're absolutely right. These are very important elections. Elena, thank you so much for the call. Johnny in Altadena, California. Hey, John. Actually, Johnny, let me put you on hold here because, and we'll pick up your call in a few minutes because we need to get into a break so we can get Free Speech TV on, or excuse me, Talk Media News on at the appropriate time. My apologies. I'll be right back with you. So anyhow, stick around. We'll be back in just a minute here with the Thom Hartmann Program. We are going to check in with Talk Media News today and find out what's going on in the rest of the world.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Coming up on 15 minutes before the hour, we'll be back in just a moment. And welcome back. Johnny, let's try this again. In Altadena, California, watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. I've enjoyed your show. I'm a member of a book club, and I've learned a lot.
Well, thank you.
My reason for calling is because of the affirmative action stuff that's going on right now, and I'm listening to some of these people in the public that has no knowledge about what affirmative action is. I was in the military when that started. I joined at 18 years old. I volunteered and joined the Navy. I spent 20 years in the submarine force. During that time, it became apparent to the top senior military people that the enlisted men that are not part of the dominant society was not getting advanced at the same rate in Vietnam that other people were, doing the same job, getting killed at the same rate. So they said we need to do something to level the playing field, which was affirmative action. You had to do the same thing that everybody else did to advance, but if you did, you would be considered. Later on, I retired from the military. I retired from Subland headquarters where I held top secret clearances for 20 years with special access. I applied for a job that was a job that was doing research and development for the government, so they had affirmative action as well. I enrolled in the college. I was taking computer classes. I got that job. I was competing against the dominant society people. That was college, but I was hired. I was hearing about affirmative action at that time. I corrected people. I got that job because I had 20 years experience and I had top secret clearance, so it was part of required to do the job. It had nothing to do with just giving me a job because I walked in as a black man and asked for a job. I worked hard. I had a lot of pride in what I'm doing. I supported this country at a critical time, and I still do. I'm upset about what I'm hearing from these people that have no knowledge of what they're saying. This young lady in Texas that's saying she's being discriminated against, I wonder if she ever said anything about the other people that's being discriminated in the same way. That's all I have to say. You can tell by my tone. I'm upset hearing this. This is my country. I served it as faithfully as everybody else have, and I don't like what I'm hearing. Yeah. And thank you for taking my call.
You're welcome, Johnny. And I'm thank you for sharing your story with us. It's a meaningful and important one, and another example of the tragedy that conservatives have used affirmative action. They've vilified affirmative action. They've trashed affirmative action. To the point that it's become almost a slur. And affirmative action has done tremendous stuff for this country. And the one program of get you into college at the front of the line that I would like to see done away with is the affirmative action program. It's not even an affirmative action program. It's basically a welfare program for the rich kids whose daddies have given a lot of money to their colleges. For example, Jared Kushner did not have the grades to get into Harvard, at least according to many of his colleagues in the press. But his dad gave a couple $1 million to Harvard, and all of a sudden they were like, oh, yes, your son wants to go here, no problem. And, that kind of program, these are called legacy admissions, that kind of program I'd love to see blown up. but I doubt that a billionaire in the White House is going to do that. But affirmative action programs, have done a lot of good for this country. Johnny, thank you for the call, and thanks for sharing your story with us. I appreciate it. It's nice to hear from you. And you said it so well. Thank you. We'll be right back. It's coming up on about 11 and a half minutes. Welcome back. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do, and goatsfortheoldgoat.com. On the line with us, Victoria Jones with Talk Media News. Hey, Victoria.
Hey, Tom.
So what's going on in the world today?
Well, I wanted to be sure to get in a couple of things that you might not otherwise hear about.
Okay.
And so one thing is the Senate approved a bill today that would allow seriously ill patients in all 50 states to request access to experimental medicines without FDA approval. It's a measure by Senator Ron Johnson, and it would authorize the use of unapproved medicines by patients diagnosed with a life-threatening illness as long as the drugs have already gone through preliminary testing on humans and continue to be evaluated in research the FDA oversees. So the eligible patients, they would have to exhaust other treatment options and be unable to participate in ongoing clinical trials. It was unanimous approval by the Senate. There were all kinds of changes to his original proposal because they had some concerns. There were skeptics' concerns. The bill does require the FDA to get reports of safety events that occur in right-to-try situations, and it forbids patients from being charged more than the cost of production for the medicines.
That's interesting because a friend of ours had a form of leukemia that he died of ultimately a few years back. But he got enrolled in a clinical trial, and I don't remember the staging of these clinical trials. There's stage 1, 2, 3, and maybe 4. Where first they're testing for toxicity, and then they're testing for efficacy, and then they're all these kind of things. And the drug company paid him to be in the clinical trial, paid all his expenses, his hospitalization, everything else. He swelled up horribly and died. I mean, the drug killed him very quickly. And that drug never came to the market. But the drug company paid him to try that drug. It sounds like this is a way of getting him to have to pay the drug company if he wants to try this drug.
Well, sometimes what happens is that patients are saying, I think this is where patients are saying, look, I know that there is a drug called M&Ms and Twix, and it's coming on the market. It's being tested. I want to try it. I'm dying. I've got 4 months. I want to try it.
Right.
And it hasn't been FDA approved yet. It's had preliminary testing on Tom, and he did all right. I want to try it.
Right.
And it's that kind of situation, I believe, that they're talking about.
Yeah. It seems to me like we already have that system set up. I mean, people can try experimental drugs. They just have to get into a trial where their health expenses are monitored and the side effects, it's all at the expense and liability of the drug company rather than the patient. And it sounds like this is flipping that upside down.
This is separate from trials.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah,
this will supplant trials eventually, and then it'll become low-cost trials for the drug companies because they're still gathering the data. But now the patients are paying them instead of them paying the patients.
Yes.
Forgive my sounding so cynical, but whenever something comes out of the drug companies and a Republican introduces it, I'm cynical.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. If it supplants trials, it is a problem. It did get unanimous approval. No, I see what you're saying. I see that there could be issues with it. Meantime, a pair of senators, Thom Tillis of North Carolina, Republican, Chris Coons of Delaware, Democrat, they're working on a backup plan to protect Special Counsel Robert Mueller and the investigation into ties between President Trump's campaign and Russia after the president floated the possibility of firing the special counsel.
Tom Tillis is a Republican, right?
Yes, so it's bipartisan. So it's the Special Counsel Integrity Act today they introduced. It would let Mueller or any special counsel challenge their firing in court. And the challenge would be heard by a 3-judge panel within 14 days. If they are not able to find good cause for the firing, special counsel would be reinstated. And it would be retroactive back to May the 17th, which is when Mueller was named as special counsel for the investigation, but it would apply to any special counsel. Wow. And it's kind of interesting. Only the Attorney General, or if the Attorney General's recused himself, the most senior Justice Department official, could discipline or fire a special counsel. There's all kind of other bits in it. Also, Senator Cory Booker and Lindsey Graham are working on another bill that would limit Trump's ability to fire Mueller.
Donald Trump has to feel like the walls are closing in. Speaking
of walls.
Yes.
I'm jumping a story now since you brought that up. There has been a leak of a transcripts of 2 phone calls that Trump had early on in his administration, which we'd already heard about, with Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto and Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull.
Of Australia.
You remember that we'd heard about these very lively phone calls. Well, it turns out they were more than that. They were explosive. And he said to Peña Nieto, "You cannot say that to the press," telling him to stop talking about not paying for the wall. If you're saying that Mexico's not going to pay for the wall, then I don't want to meet with you guys anymore because I cannot live with that. And he went on and on and on about it. Wow. And he also said that New Hampshire was a drug-infested den, which has caused all the politicians in New Hampshire, Republican and Democrat, to have their heads explode.
Yeah. Let's see this. The senators, Jean Shaheen is a Democrat. The other Sununu's son?
Maggie Hassan, she's a Democrat. She's the former governor, yes. And the Republican governor, a little more politely, but I would say his head has politely exploded.
Yeah.
Governor Chris Sununu, yeah.
Yeah, amazing.
The Department of Justice is threatening to withhold funding from cities struggling with violent crime unless they cooperate with federal efforts to crack down on illegal immigration. Basically, in letters today, the Department of Justice warned Albuquerque, Baltimore, San Bernardino, and Stockton, California, they'd be ineligible for funding unless they give federal immigration officials access to detention facilities. We're talking about sanctuary cities here.
Okay. Okay.
So that happened. And Democratic senators are urging the FCC to extend the public comment period on its proposal to scrap the net neutrality rules.
Well, they're already getting something like 96 or 97% comments, in favor of net neutrality and opposed to Ajit Pai's agenda. Ajit Pai has already said he's going to ignore them. Why does it matter?
Well, because they're saying, look, you've only allowed a 30-day comment period. It was 60 days in 2014. They want 60 days. They've already received more than 16 million comments.
Wow.
More than any other FCC item in history.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, net neutrality is a big deal. It's a huge big deal, and it gets no press at all. I'm convinced it's because several of the big television networks and the cable networks are owned by companies that are ISPs, or about to be owned by companies that are ISPs in the case of CNN, and they just don't want to antagonize their corporate overlords, but it's not a good thing. Victoria Jones, thank you, Victoria.
Thank you very much.
Great speaking with you. Victoria Jones with Talk Media News. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight. And this is from page 180. The subhead is, the title is What We Need to Remember, the chapter title. The subhead is The Slavery, Losing Your Freedom of Civilization. In 1861, Mark Twain rode the railroad and overland stage across much of the United States, documenting his journey in the book Roughing It, published in 1871. During a stagecoach ride near the Great Salt Lake, he encountered a group of the Shoshone-speaking Native Americans called the Ghost Suite, often referred to then by whites as the Digger Indians. Twain considered them, quote, the wretchedest type of mankind I have ever seen, end quote, and wrote, quote, they produce nothing at all. They have no villages, no gatherings together into strictly defined tribal communities, a people whose only shelter is a rag cast on a bush to keep off a portion of the snow, and yet who inhabit one of the most rocky, wintry, repulsive wastes that our country or any other man can exhibit. The Bushmen and the Gashoots are manifestly descended from the self-same gorilla or kangaroo or Norway rat, whichever animal Adam the Darwinians trace them to, end of quote. Even to this day, many people who have not bothered to study the Shoshone or other hunter-gatherer people imagine them in much of the same way Mark Twain did. Books and movies over the years have implied that their lives must be a continuous wretched struggle to find food from day to day, and that their cultures and religions hardly qualify as either. In that belief, however, Twain and many modern people are wrong. If the highest goal of contemporary civilization is to have leisure time, free from the demands of providing for food and shelter, so that one may then contemplate the great mysteries of life, then the Shoshone had achieved the pinnacle of success. Our culture teaches that civilizations like city-states come about as a result of technological innovation, such as agriculture, giving people more free time. With this free time, the story goes, they produce art, literature, religion, and explore the cosmos. Primitive cultures don't have these things because they don't have the time for them. In fact, these represent two of our most deadly myths. Leisure time. Every empirical study of both historic and contemporary cultures finds that the more complex and hierarchical a culture is, the harder the people in it must work and the more frantic their lives are. Just look at how many hours a week the average middle management executive works, about 60, and how many families have two 40-hour-per-week workers devoting 80 hours a week to paying the mortgage and feeding the family. Only a very small class of people within the city-state enjoys the leisure time state of freedom, its economic and political rulers. And because the ruling class is not producing food, those who are food producers must spend extra time making food for those who are not. The Shoshone require the same average 2,000 calories of food energy every day as do any other humans. However, they expend on average only 2 hours a day to acquire it, because they were a nomadic people who moved from place to place following their food supply. As the seasons changed and food became scarce in one place, they simply moved to another. If one food wasn't available, they knew where and how to find another. Toronto University professor Richard Lee found that the similarly structured tribal group, the Kung of the Kalahari Desert in Africa, spend less than 15 hours a week, 2 hours a day, attending to gathering food and the other necessities of life. The rest of the time, he said, they played, told stories, and made music. John Yellen of the National Science Foundation found the same to be true of the Hottentots, another hunter-gatherer group in Africa. The Shoshone had an elaborate and meaningful culture and religion. They generally did not suffer from famines or plagues. They had lived comfortably and happily on their land for at least several thousand, perhaps as many as 10,000 years, keeping the land as clean and pure and productive as it could be in that desert and mountain region, living harmoniously with their neighbors. At the time Mark Twain took his ride through their territory, the Shoshone had accomplished over 1,000 years a second achievement, which is regularly touted by our leaders as the highest goal of humankind. They had eliminated warfare. There was not even a word for war in their language. The Shoshone lived a tribal life in one of the most desolate parts of North America, with a population density that ranged from one person every 50 square miles to one person every 100 square miles. A typical tribal unit was a single extended family of 5 to 20 people, and they traveled at a leisurely pace across a wide area. On those rare occasions when others, including whites, came to attack them, they simply ran away and hid. The occasions for attack were rare, largely because the Shoshone accumulated no wealth. They had no systems for preserving and storing food, minerals, or anything other than what they could carry. In this regard, they were not poor. Their lives were comfortable, their family interactions meaningful, and their food supply ample. A symbol of this is found in the highest status act a Shoshone could commit in the presence of others, to give them what he had. Generosity is how one achieves social standing among the Shoshone, whereas the accumulation and control of surplus food and possessions were how whites achieved social status. They were called the diggers by whites because they often dug in the ground for roots and food. Whites assumed this implied some sort of agricultural stupidity, but in fact the Shoshone had a deep and rich knowledge of life in their environment, both above and below the ground. They used a sacred digging stick to extract food, and it was both manufactured and transported with ritual and ceremony. If a stone had to be moved, a different type of stick was used. When a Shoshone looked out at the natural world, she saw a landscape rich with life, both visible and hidden. That life was known to her, called to her, spoke to her, and often guided her. Last Hours of Ancient Thought.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. You know, we talk a lot about the power of money in politics and how badly money corrupts politicians and has corrupted our political system. It goes way beyond that. Money is destroying our environment. There's a brilliant piece. NPR put this thing together. August 3rd. Was that today? Yesterday? Yeah, it's today. Yeah. August 3rd. The title is "The Gulf of Mexico's Dead Zone is the Biggest Ever Seen." And, you know, basically it's there is now a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. It appears every summer. That is 8,776 square miles. That's the size of New Jersey. And it's a dead zone. That is to mean there's nothing living in it, no animal life anyway. There is plant life, and that's in fact the problem. It's a dead zone because lots and lots of fertilizer are used in the upper Midwest on crops principally grown to feed cattle. Right, a mind-boggling amount of our productive farmland is used to grow soybeans and corn that are then fed to cattle, which are then fed to us. And so much factory farm technology is being used that all this artificial fertilizer is being put on these crops, and then it washes away. And in fact, in this article that NPR published, they noted that the unusually heavy rains. So the record-breaking dead zone this year is the result of unusually heavy rains in the Midwest, which flushed a lot of nutrients into the Gulf. So the fertilizer gets flushed into the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River carries it down to the Gulf of Mexico. We're talking millions of pounds, maybe millions of tons of this stuff. I've never seen a specific quantification of it, but it's huge. And that fertilizer then, just like it fertilized plants up in Indiana, is now, or wherever, is now fertilizing the algae in the Gulf of Mexico. So you add fertilizer to warm water, and the algae just grows like crazy, and in the process, it sucks up all the oxygen, converts that oxygen to carbohydrates,
bonds it with carbon and water, or carbon and hydrogen, and which makes plant matter, and then the plant matter eventually dies and settles to the bottom of the ocean. But in the process, it sucks all the oxygen out. The bottom oxygen, milligrams per liter, typically it should be well above 5 milligrams per liter of oxygen. It's less than 2. So it's not enough oxygen for a fish to survive. They would suffocate, and they do suffocate. 8,700 square foot dead zone. And we had this in the Chesapeake Bay near here, and near off the coast here on the East Coast, and we invested over $1 billion in trying to fix this problem, because it was also taking out fisheries, and really important fisheries, which it is also doing down in the Gulf. And it's not solved, but it's like on its way in the Chesapeake. But down in the Gulf of Mexico, no. The responsibility is too broadly distributed across America. There's too many states that are contributing to this problem, and the problem is just making things worse. Meanwhile, as I pointed out, much of that fertilizer is being used to grow crops that are going to be fed to beef. Loma Linda University, which has one of the best medical schools in the United States, it's a Seventh-day Adventist organization. The Seventh-day Adventists are vegetarians, and so they tend to look at diet and nutrition frequently. And this from theatlantic.com, the headline, "If everyone ate beans instead of beef," and then the subhead, "With one dietary change, the U.S. could almost meet greenhouse gas emission goals." This was done by Helen Harwat and a team of scientists at Oregon State University, Bard College, and Loma Linda University. And they calculated, reading from this article, calculated just what would happen if every American made one dietary change, substituting beans for beef. Now, this is not talking about becoming a vegetarian. The assumption is people are still going to eat chicken and pork and turkey and fish. Only thing that, and for that matter, dairy, cheese, eggs, milk, the only thing being taken out of the diet is beef. They found that if everyone were willing to do that, the U.S. could come close to meeting its 2020 greenhouse gas emission goals pledged by President Obama in 2009. Even if nothing about our energy infrastructure or transportation system changed, and it is changing, we are electrifying rapidly. But even if nothing happened, this one dietary change could achieve somewhere between 46 and 74% of the reductions needed to reach that target. So think about it, right? Less beef. Meanwhile, Donald Trump, this from Victoria Jones's newsletter today, she I think referenced this very quickly in her report on our program a few minutes ago, but on July 19th, Donald Trump had a meeting with his national security team. I'll give you the punchline at the end, and then fill in the blanks here. Trump left the national security meeting without making a decision on strategy. We're speaking specifically of Afghanistan here. His advisors were stunned, administration officials and others briefed on the meeting said. 2 Pentagon officials close to General Mattis said he returned from the White House that morning visibly upset. A defense official confirmed that discussions are underway at the Pentagon regarding the future of Colonel John Nicholson, who's the guy running the Afghanistan occupation or war or whatever you want to call it. So what did Trump do and say that so rattled his entire national security team that they couldn't even come to a decision? Well, Trump started out by saying he had met with some Afghan veterans, veterans of the Afghanistan war, and in fact, he kept coming back to this, even though he was sitting in a room full of generals, and the generals are saying, here's what's going on. And he's saying, I don't want to listen to you guys. I talked to some veterans. Right? They came to the White House. I pinned, awards on them or, whatever. And I talked to them, and they told me we're losing. He says, we aren't winning. We are losing. Those are quotes from his tirade. He's never met John Nicholson, the guy who's running the war in Afghanistan.
And in fact, back in February, Nicholson was the first to say that this war is a stalemate. And if we are going to, quote, win it, we need more troops. Now, I disagree with that. I don't think you can win an occupation. All you can do with an occupation is install a dictator and suppress the people. We did that with the Shah of Iran. Didn't work out so well. But that's basically it. I mean, you know, so I, you know, the policy is in my opinion wrong, but this is where it gets really strange. In the meeting, Trump repeatedly suggested Mattis and Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman Joseph Dunford replace Nicholson since he's not winning. Nicholson is the guy running Afghanistan. During the meeting, Trump also compared the war to a New York restaurant's 1980 renovation. Remember Club 21? Club 21 was like this really hot, it was the place to go to be seen and see and be seen. Rolling Stone about three weeks ago did a long story about Club 21. Fascinating stuff. And the story that Trump told to everybody in the cabinet room, or everybody in this national security room meeting, was that Club 21 was losing money because they hired a really expensive consultant who told them that they needed to expand their kitchen. And Trump said, you know, the cooks could have told them that. They didn't need to hire a consultant. But Club 21 shut down to put in a bigger kitchen because of these consultants. And he said that they were out of business for a year. Well, it turns out they were closed for 2 months in 1987 to undergo a full renovation. It had nothing to do with fancy consultants. It had nothing to do with a bigger kitchen. It was, you know, you upgrade the facility. So the national security team is sitting here going, oh, wait a minute, we're talking Afghanistan. Why are you talking about a hipster restaurant in New York City? It's not a hipster, it wasn't even the word. You know, it's a yuppie, whatever, in the 1980s. In the meeting, Victoria reports, Trump also complained that the U.S. isn't making money off Afghanistan's estimated $1 trillion in mineral wealth, while China is. And yes, in fact, during the Bush administration, they negotiated with China to let China come into Afghanistan and start mining raw materials. China is mining copper as we speak in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is insanely mineral rich, $1 trillion worth of minerals there. And so Trump is berating his national security staff about, why aren't we stealing their stuff? Why are we letting China do it? And he left the meeting basically in shock. I mean, these guys are like, holy cow, is this guy is president of the United States? Nate shared with me Andy Borowitz's most recent piece. White House accuses French woman of spreading pro-immigration propaganda. This is in the New Yorker. The White House said on Wednesday accused an elderly French woman of spreading pro-immigration propaganda that undermined everything this country stands for. Is he talking about? Statue of Liberty. It's great. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with your calls. More of the news of the day. Oh, the American carnage. I got to tell you about the American carnage. Stick around. Welcome back. Michael, watching Free Speech TV on the Dish Network in Santa Clarita, California. Michael, what's on your mind today?
Wow, you know more about me than me. Anyway, no, I was calling about Jeff Sessions and his looking into universities, reverse discrimination. Mm-hmm. You know, us poor white people are getting it so bad. But anyway, doesn't the DOJ have an entire department dedicated to complaints of discrimination?
Yeah, it has in the neighborhood of 300 people staffed there. And
are they being inundated with all these complaints? Is this a solution for no problem?
I don't know, Michael. You know, if they're running a help wanted ad, I'd guess that the roughly 300 people in the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department haven't noticed that this is a problem. White people being discriminated against in colleges, but the Trump administration, you know, this is just a nakedly political move, Michael. This is, you know, I mean, the Republicans have been riding this hobby horse since the 80s, and whenever they're down, and whenever the rubes begin to figure out that the Republicans are just trying to basically rip them and everybody else off in this country so that rich people can get richer, the Republican Party rolls out some new outrage, right? Oh my God, trans people are using bathrooms. Oh my God, the affirmative action. Black people might have an edge. We can't have that. And in fact, it's really, it's not even that, but still, that's how it's sold. That's how it's promoted. This is just pure dog whistle to the base.
It reminds me of that movie, I think it was called House, anyway, where the dog goes, squirrel, and looks off at something else all of a sudden. This immediate distraction going.
Yes. Yeah. It's look over there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Look.
Yep. You're concerned about what's going on, with the investigations into Trump. You're concerned about what's going on with the billionaires running the cabinet. You're concerned that Betsy DeVos wants to ruin our schools. You're concerned that Scott Pruitt is increasing the levels of poison and pollution that your children are absorbing from our air and water. You're concerned that Ryan Zinke is going to sell off our federal lands and they're going to be, mining and drilling in Yellowstone. Don't worry about that. Black people are getting into college. Oh my God. And trans people are using bathrooms, and on it goes. This is Republican. This is GOP 101, and it goes. This is where the Reagan Democrats came from. Reagan Democrats were essentially the same thing as Trump voters, which was white people largely in the South, but actually all across the country, who feel put upon, and who basically have, shall we say, racial awareness, and not of the good kind. And
ooh, nice.
Yeah. So it's an excellent point, Michael. Thanks for the call and thanks for making it. This is craven. This is pitching a political appeal to the lowest common denominator among bigoted white people. It's a naked shout out to bigoted white people. It is morally wrong. It's politically wrong. It is technically wrong, right? They're complaining about a problem that by and large doesn't exist. And to the extent that it does exist, it's not a problem. It's actually a good thing. It's a good thing for white kids going to college with diversity around them. But don't tell that to Trump or his Stephen Miller right-wing white base. We'll be back.
Hi, I'm Valerie with Free Speech TV. We're proud to provide you with independent, unfiltered news and documentaries. And as our valued viewer, you can help us continue bringing Free Speech TV well into the future. Join our Pearly Gate Rebels, our planned giving program. Your gift of any size will help ensure democracy endures through an informed citizenry. You can donate property, money, or assets. It's easy. My spouse and I are proud Pearly Gate Rebels. We're doing our part to ensure that Free Speech TV will be here to deliver thought-provoking news and information well into the future. Join us. Call 877-378-8669 or email me at valerie@freespeech.org. Rebel against media owned by billionaires and become one of our Pearly Gate Rebels today.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Okay, American Carnage. You will recall when Donald Trump gave his inaugural address, apparently written by Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon, he talked about American carnage. He promised to end American carnage. Well, as Christopher Ingraham is pointing out in today's Wonk blog over in the Washington Post, gun deaths are up 12% since Trump became president. This is huge. Gun deaths are up over 12% year over year. Firearm injuries are up nearly 8%. The number of children under the age of 12 shot by a gun has increased by 16%, while instances of defensive gun use are up by nearly 30%. The first 200 days of 2017, the carnage has only gotten worse. In the first 200 days of 2014, for example, we had 6,206 gun deaths in the United States.
In the first 200 days of Trump's administration, we've had 8,539 gun deaths, 6,000 versus more than 8,000. Since 2014, total firearms injuries are up 50%. Since 2014, shootings of children are up by nearly 30%. Now, why would that be? I'm guessing that there are two major variables that are driving this. The first is that during the Obama presidency, the NRA and the Republican Party and others were promoting this lie that Barack Obama and the Democrats wanted to take your gun away and, you know, outlaw handguns and quack, 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 right? That this was the whole Obama thing. You know, that black guy in the White House, he doesn't want you white guys to have guns. That was the message. I remember, you know, in fact, I told this story on the air in 2008, or yeah, I guess it was early 2009. It was just as President Obama was had become president. And in fact, it was the Christmas of 2008 because I was in Michigan with my family, and my brother Steve and I and one of our nephews and I think one of my other brothers, I think it might have been my brother John, we went out to a gun range, you know, which is one of the things that we do when we get together is competitive shooting. Strange but true. And, you know, brothers find ways to bond. And the guy I wanted to buy a box of ammunition, or actually I wanted to buy several boxes of ammunition. I was going to buy it for everybody there. And the guy said, I'll sell you 2 boxes, that's it. And each person can, actually he wouldn't even let each person buy 2 boxes because the kids who were with us, he wouldn't let them buy any. And his shelves were half empty. I mean, there was very little ammunition in the store. This is a big gun range. And I'm like, why? And he said, because that N-word, and only he didn't, you know, he said it. The entire place was white. He starts going off about how Obama, that N-word in the White House, is going to take away our guns and people are stocking up. And I mean, he was dead serious. And I'm like, you really think so? And he said, let me show you. And he pulls out his phone and he shows me an email that, I'm not making this up, shows me this email about how you know, the details of Obama's plan. How Obama is going to take away people's guns, and the people who won't surrender their guns, he's going to imprison them in FEMA camps. And this guy really believed this. And the other guys around him were all nodding their heads like bobbleheads going, oh, yeah, yep. You know, there's a couple people in there. Was one guy in there to buy a rifle. There was another guy in there who was renting a gun to shoot in the same range we were in. I'm about to walk into a shooting range with a .40 caliber handgun, but the guy, you know, the other guy who's nodding his head to the guy who runs the place, he's about to do the same thing. So I'm not interested in getting in a gunfight. So I'm not arguing with this guy. I just said, you know, I don't think that's the case. And he's like, oh yeah, look at this email. So gun sales went nuts for 8 years, just absolutely nuts. And now there's all these guns and ammunition all over the United States. And what's happening? Gun deaths are up. Suicides are up. Accidental deaths are up. Children's shootings up 30% in 2 years. You know, now that there's no longer, you know, this, the black guy in the White House, it's Donald Trump. It's, oh, well, hey, let's just shoot somebody.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And in fact, as Troy points out, gun sales are down right now. It's absolutely true because the hysteria is gone, but the guns are still here.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from We the People. This is an illustrated book. It's, illustrated kind of like a comic book. It's very, very readable, but it's serious stuff. This is from page 10. War is the Enemy is the chapter. George Orwell's idea in his novel 1984 that perpetual war was a masterful technique for repressing the masses was not new. On April 20th, 1795, James Madison, who helped shepherd through the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and would become President of the United States in the following decade, wrote, Of all the enemies to public liberty, war is perhaps the most to be dreaded because it comprises and develops the germ of every other. War is the parent of armies, and from these proceed debts and taxes. And armies and debts and taxes are the known instruments for bringing the many under the domination of the few. Reflecting on war's impact on the presidency, Madison continued his letter about the dangerous and intoxicating powers of war. In war, too, the discretionary power of the presidency is extended. Its influence in dealing out offices, favors, and emoluments, profits, is multiplied, and all the means of seducing the minds are added to those of subduing the force of the people. The same malignant aspect in republicanism may be traced in the inequality of fortunes and the opportunities of fraud growing out of a state of war, and in the degeneracy of manners and morals engendered by both. No nation, Madison concluded, could preserve its freedom in the midst of continual warfare. Once the Revolutionary War was over and the Constitution had been worked out and presented to the states for ratification, Thomas Jefferson turned his attention to what he and Madison felt was a terrible inadequacy in the new Constitution. It didn't explicitly stipulate the natural rights of the new nation's citizens, and it didn't protect against the rise of new commercial monopolies like the East India Company, which had once dominated life in the colonies and used the British Army as its own private army. On December 20th, 1787, Jefferson wrote to James Madison about his concerns regarding the Constitution. He said bluntly that it was deficient in several areas. Quote, "I will now tell you what I do not like. First, the omission of a Bill of Rights, providing clearly and without the aid of sophism for freedom of religion, freedom of the press, protection against standing armies, restriction of commercial monopolies, the eternal and unremitting force of the habeas corpus laws, and trials by jury in all manners of fact triable by the laws of the land and not by the laws of nations." When the United States was first declared independent in 1776, its founders knew humans had previously faced tyranny in the form of despotic kings and inquisitional churches. The Bill of Rights firmly declared that no church could ever again control a democratic government. And the Declaration of Independence made it clear right from the beginning that when citizens are burdened by, quote, a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government. Thus, the founders and the framers disposed of despotism by church or state, guaranteeing the absolute and inviolable rights of a nation's citizens to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But there was a third entity that Thomas Jefferson and others worried may also one day rise to seize control of the government and enslave the people. James Madison wrote, "There is an evil which ought to be guarded against in the indefinite accumulation of property from the capacity of holding it in perpetuity by corporations. The power of all corporations ought to be limited in this respect. Their growing wealth acquired by them never fails to be a source of abuses." In 1787, Jefferson proposed an additional amendment to the Bill of Rights to restrain corporations, calling for a constitutional amendment to, quote, ban monopolies in commerce, although it failed under the Federalist opposition of the Hamilton-Adams faction. In arguing for a ban on commercial monopolies, the founders, who had just fought a war of independence against both Britain and the world's largest transnational corporation, the East India Company, whose tea they'd thrown into Boston Harbor, knew the danger of corporations becoming so powerful they could influence government the way the East India Company had persuaded England for a tax reduction and free trade agreement that came to be known as the Tea Act of 1773. But it's not just Madison and Jefferson's remarkable foresight that's warning us about war. More recent presidents have also noted the danger of a corporate usurpation of democracy, particularly when fed by the bloody meat of war. As he was leaving office in 1961, President Dwight Eisenhower looked back over his years as president, as general, as supreme commander of the Allied forces in France during World War II, and noted that the Cold War had brought a new Orwellian type of war to the American landscape, a perpetual war supported by a perpetual war industry. It was the confluence of the two things that Jefferson had warned against and had tried to ban in his first proposed version of the Bill of Rights. In a nationally televised speech, Eisenhower spoke in sobering terms about this. He said, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, Yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the structure of our very society. He was talking about the military-industrial complex. It continues from there. The book is We the People.
Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights. You can support the Thom Hartmann Program and see video of our entire 3-hour show over at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Okay, so the EPA and the Department of Interior and the Justice Department have divisions that prosecute wrongdoers, shall we say, and environmental wrongdoers. The Justice Department, for example, prosecuted British Petroleum, BP. Just, put that in your brain for a moment. There is a fellow by the name of Jeffrey B. Clark. He's a lawyer here in Washington, D.C. And this afternoon, or today, the Senate Judiciary Committee voted to approve his appointment as Assistant Attorney General for the Environment and Natural Resources Division of the Department of Justice. Now, this is the department that prosecuted BP over the Deepwater Horizon spill. It is the department that prosecutes on behalf of the EPA when rules are broken. This is the guy who's going to become the boss of that department, right? All nine, the committee, the vote was 11-9, 11 Republicans, 9 Democrats. All the Democrats voted against him. Why? Well, he would oversee the department's representation of the EPA, the Department of the Interior, and other federal agencies in court, as well as lead enforcement of environmental regulations and laws. Who is this guy? Well, he's the guy who defended BP against this department. When this department sued BP, he's the lawyer who defended them. And according to his law firm, successfully defended them. Successfully defended the company against a multi-billion-dollar appeal brought by 11 Louisiana parishes. He has also suggested that, well, the article here, this is over at thinkprogress.org by Mark Hand. Clark defended BP from charges brought as a result of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. He has cast doubt on established climate science, and he has questioned the EPA's authority to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. This is literally, well, not literally, I guess. This is as close to literal as you can get in a metaphor, putting the fox in charge of the hen house. And this is what the Republicans want to do. This is something, well, Sheldon Whitehouse, the senator, the Democratic senator, Senator Whitehouse, he said the power of this industry, and he's talking about the fossil fuel industry. Well, in fact, I'll give you three sentences. He says, what I see is that this whole climate denial nonsense is a racket. It's been run by the fossil fuel industry and its fronts for years and years now. Many are fooled by it. Some go along with it. A few are knowing propagators of fraud in the midst of this. The power of this industry has crept into government through this administration in unprecedented ways, but in ways that our founding fathers would recognize and would call corruption. And yes, this is the kind of damage that the Trump administration is doing to the United States of America. I mean, what gets a lot of publicity is, is he going to get us into a war with North Korea? Is he going to get us into a war with Iran? And of course, those are big and consequential concerns. But right now, as we speak, there are lawyers and bureaucrats in the EPA, in the Department of Justice, in the Department of Interior, who are working to tear down the protections that have been put in place to protect your children and mine, your life and mine, from giant corporate polluters. They're trying to tear those protections down, and they are succeeding. And that is serious consequential damage. So anyhow, that's my rant. And I'm standing by it. Charles in Opelika, Florida. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
I'm well. How are you, Charles?
I'm doing fine, but I do have a question for you as far as Donald Trump is concerned. I think he's leading up to some type of confrontation with North Korea.
Yeah, he told Lindsey Graham, at least according to Lindsey Graham, that he was willing to go to war with North Korea. That's a damn scary thing.
Well, I got a question for you, too. When was it that he met with these generals and he had this big blow-up? Was it after the G8 summit? Oh, I'm sorry, the meeting with Putin?
I don't know. I'd have to pull the article out of the trash. I think it was June 19th is what I remember, but it could be July 19th. It was one or the other.
Because to me,
I'm not sure when the G20 meeting was. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. To me, it's like this guy is getting directions from Russia. I mean, he stops funding the Free Syrian Army. That's just to let Russia have their way in the Middle East when they actually almost lost their foothold with the only ally they have, if Bala al-Shah was gone.
Yeah, in that region. I mean, keep in mind, Russia has an Air Force base and a naval base in Syria. And so our going in and bombing Syria would be analogous to Russia bombing a country where we have a military base. And I doubt we would put up with that. So, the whole thing around Syria, regardless of what you think about Russia or what you think about Trump or anything else, the situation in Syria is more complex than pretty much any of the other ones in the Middle East. And it's not just black and white, and it concerns me tremendously. And I thought that when President Obama worked with Russia and other powers to remove the weapons of mass destruction, the chemical weapons from Syria, and worked out the Iran deal, all things that Trump wanted to reverse, wanted to undo. The only one that he ultimately didn't want to undo was the deal with Syria. It's just this is stuff that we need to know about. We need to be paying attention to. Charles, excellent point. Thanks for the call. Edgar in Huntley, Illinois. Hey, Edgar, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. How are you doing? I'd like to talk about the actual, economics, market, how it's, everyone's, raving about how it's riding at all-time highs. And I also feel that we have adopted some of the leisure society tendencies that you would expect if we were all making, vast amount of money, and how everyone's just concentrated on that single aspect without really looking at the bigger picture. And I'd like to know, what can we do to really get the American people to pay attention that it's not just all about the money.
Right. So you're talking about the stock market and the fact that the Dow broke 22,000 yesterday, and I'm not sure I understand exactly what the point is you're making.
Well, that's the point that the Dow Jones Industrial broke 22,000 points, and
right. What it means is a lot of rich people got a lot richer. I mean, the Dow in 2009 was at 7,500 or 7,600, I guess it was, and now it's at 22,000. So, if you had millions of dollars and you bought a lot of stock, as a lot of very wealthy people did after the crash, when the market started recovering, you'd be far more rich right now. But the vast majority of Americans don't own any consequential amount of stock. They may have a little bit in a 401k or something like that, but it really, the stock market is not an indicator of our economy. When the stock market crashes, it's an indicator of severe problems in our economy. But when the stock market rises, it doesn't necessarily mean the economy is healthy. It means rich people are healthy financially. Yeah. And that's the message that needs to get out. I'm guessing that's what you're saying, Edgar.
Yeah, just the consensus that everyone thinks that if the market's riding high, we're all, doing well, which really, like you said, it's not an indicator.
No. In fact, if anything, what we should do is go back to, and I literally have not seen this since the 1980s, but prior to the Reagan administration, newspapers had labor sections, in fact, or at least labor pages.
And I remember, growing up as a kid, the labor section would talk about what's the unemployment rate, what's the unionization rate, what is the wage rate.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And those are the real indicators of the health of an economy, is how are the workers doing? When you look at the Dow, you're looking at how are the CEOs doing. Welcome back. Jeremy, watching Free Speech TV in Woodland, California. Hey, Jeremy, what's up?
Hey, Tom.
Excuse me.
I just want to make two comments about affirmative action. First of all, when you hear about affirmative action, people right away jump to black people, people of color, handicapped people, etc. But the reality is that white women were some of the primary beneficiaries of affirmative action. The 50s and 60s, white women in corporate America were secretaries and receptionists.
Right.
Not true now. That's as a result of affirmative action. And the second thing is that affirmative action, we've always had it. Like you talked earlier about the kids in college.
Right, we just had it for rich people.
Right. And I always say that affirmative action is really, we've always had it, and it's for whom the action is affirmed.
Right. Right. Yeah, good point. Very, very well said, Jeremy. Thank you for the call and for pointing that out. Excuse me. Liz in Columbia, Missouri. Hey, Liz, what's up?
Hi, Tom. First, I'm going to say something kind of funny. My husband is an immigrant, and we've been married 27 years. He has his green card, and he works here at the University of Missouri. He has a daughter, my stepdaughter, who was born in Texas, and she's an American citizen. She lives in Panama, and when she visits here, she can't speak English. She only speaks Spanish.
Wow.
I mean, it's ridiculous.
That's fascinating. That's
She's
fascinating.
a citizen. She can't speak English. She took ESL, but...
Yeah.
And then the whole thing here at the University of Missouri, I felt so bad about that. And the woman from Jeff City was talking about the atmosphere. And I used to teach there in graduate school as a TA. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really realize it, excuse me, but I did know of some incidences on campus, like some idiot put cotton balls around the Black Student Union, and things like that would happen, and we'd all just go, oh, God. And, they dealt with it with disciplinary action, but it's just, when they had the shutdown and everything, I was pretty sympathetic.
Right.
But that's about all I have to say, I guess.
Okay. Well, you said it very well, Liz. And I'm just, if I may, since you're in Missouri, we were talking about Missouri earlier.
Right.
What's your take on that situation?
Oh, the racism here?
Yeah.
Well, here in Columbia, it's a university town. We've got people from everywhere. But I don't know. It's just, if you go to a little town around here, I don't know. I had a friend who visited me here from Colorado who's a big black guy, and he and his brother, their car broke down on the highway, and they were really nervous. He told me we were so nervous, and another time, my mom told me when she was driving to St. Louis, she noticed that all the cars that were pulled over by the police were full of black people. Yeah. And she was just sailing on through, and that's the other thing. In Columbia, I read in the paper that the number of people that are pulled over by police, it's like 70% black and 30% white.
Yeah.
Which
doesn't reflect the racial makeup of the community at all. Yeah. Liz, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the front page of the online version of the Washington Post right now, there's a piece, a graphic, 4 takeaways from Trump's calls
These are quotes from Donald Trump to Pinochet and Malcolm Turnbull, the presidents of Mexico and Australia, respectively. This is going to kill me. Boy, that will make us look awfully bad. I look like a dope. This is a killer. I'm wondering if Donald Trump thought that he could talk to presidents of other countries the way he would talk to a fellow real estate developer in New York City if they're trying to divide up, which part of the building or which part of the block are you going to take, which part am I going to take, or, how are we going to do this deal? And he just thought he was, one oligarch talking to another, not realizing that Mexico and Australia are actually, constitutionally limited representative democratic republics. They're not, they're not businesses run by billionaires. I don't think Donald Trump understands governance. I just don't. It's scary. Ken in Streamwood, Illinois. Hey, Ken, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for all your information. You started out the show with a segment on billionaires and their diseases.
Yeah, I'd say specifically right-wing money-hoarding billionaires, because there are some decent billionaires out there. Whether they're left-wing or not, I don't know or care. But they're you got George Soros, a good guy. But it's
I used to live in the BVI and
in the what?
In the British Virgin Islands.
Oh, okay.
Where Virgin, what's the name now?
Richard Branson?
Richard Branson, yeah. He's got 2 islands over there.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I was asked to work over there on one of the islands, on the main island.
Right.
And this big house. And one example of what regular guy he is, I was sitting at having breakfast. Everything was included, when we were working there. And I was sitting at this table, it's like an outdoor dining room, about a 40-foot table. I was the only one there, and he came walking in with his cereal. He says, "Do you mind if I join you?" And we had a nice conversation, and I actually asked him for advice on a product that I was trying to develop, and he gave me a card of someone to call. He gave me some advice. He's an outstanding man, and he's got another island there, Mosquito Island, which he is turning 100% green. No generators, anything like that. Solar, wind, and sea power. He's an incredible man, down to earth. Sit and talk with you and BS with you, and I was so impressed with him.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind him being president over here.
Yeah, but see, I don't think that Richard Branson is motivated by more money. I think he's actually, he loves the game that he's doing of business, and he's concerned about the future of the planet. He's a good guy.
Records.
Pardon?
He started out his business selling used records.
Used records. That's right. Virgin Records. Yeah, you're right.
Virgin Records. Yeah.
You're right. So he worked his way up. Maybe that has something to do with it. But I'm not opposed to people being wealthy. Although I do think that if somebody has assets of over $1 billion, then the system is starting to break down because of how many billionaires we have and how many billions of dollars they've accumulated and are hanging on to. But that said, it's the right-wing billionaires who most concern me, because they're inserting themselves into politics as an investment, for themselves rather than for society. When George Soros supports a Democrat, he knows that he's going to get his taxes raised. It's not going to help George Soros. It's going to help the world. When some right-wing billionaire supports some right-wing politician who's going to deny climate science and rape our public lands via Ryan Zinke, they're doing that because they want to have the copper mine in Yellowstone. I mean, it's just all about the greed. So, excellent, great story, Ken. Thanks for calling and sharing it with us. Joan in Long Island City, New York. Hey, Joan, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. It's I called about the Victoria. I'm just going to take off speakerphone.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I called about Victoria Jones's thing about the clinical trial.
Yeah.
And okay. So my son Adam was in a clinical trial in 2001 for a disease called mucopolysaccharidosis type 2, which is also known as Hunter syndrome.
Mhm.
He was one of 12 patients. The way I understood it was what Victoria said, was that people that could not get into the trial, that could benefit from the drug, would then be able to get the drug while it was waiting for FDA approval, and that the pharmaceutical companies would not make money on the drug. They would only be allowed to charge what it cost them to make.
Right, but in a clinical trial, they don't charge anything.
Right. So we're talking about the patients that would have the same disease that the clinical trial was for, but did not qualify.
Well, what happens when the drug companies can now do basically free clinical trials? Because they're still gathering information. In fact, the FDA is required to gather the information, which tells me that this is basically what they're doing is shifting the costs of clinical trials. They're simply not calling it clinical trials anymore. Now, I could be totally wrong on this. This is purely, reactive opinion. But it sounds to me like what they're trying to do is shift the cost, get out of the clinical trial business, and get into the we'll sell you the drugs at cost if you'll tell us if you die from them business. Basically, free clinical trials that are not at the expense of the pharmaceutical companies, but rather are at the expense of the patients. And once they start doing that, what are they going to do? They're going to say that clinical trial that your son was in that had 12 people in it, the next one will only have 3 people in it.
Right. That I see, but I guess the way it sounded when she described it didn't sound like they were going to give up the clinical trial because the FDA has to have that information from a clinical trial in order to approve the drug.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to see how this shakes out, and maybe my skepticism / paranoia is completely unjustified. Maybe the drug companies are just doing wonderful stuff to help American people, and the senators on both sides of the aisle are just going along with it, not because they got a single penny from the drug companies, but because they're really concerned about the public health of the United States. Color me skeptical, but maybe.
Right. I can see both sides, but as a parent that was involved in the clinical trial, speaking with other parents whose children could not get into the trial, and how frustrating it was for them, because a lot of the children with my son's disease passed away before the age of 10.
Right.
And this would be their only hope.
Did your son do okay out of this?
Yeah, he actually did.
That's great.
His life expectancy was supposed to be 17. He will be 37 at the end of August.
That's great, because my daughter's fiancé just melted down and died as a result of a clinical trial. And
yeah, we were very fortunate.
Yeah, it's a tough one, and just and having seen that, having sat by his bed and held his hand, watching as his stomach bloated up to maybe 3 times normal size just before he died, his liver was swollen, his guts were swollen. He was in horrible, horrible pain, jaundiced. I mean, it was just a god-awful thing. And to think that people may have to go through that without the support. I mean, the drug company, because he was in a clinical trial, was paying for his hospitalization. They paid for the whole process while he died. And to think that parents may have to pay for that now instead of having the drug companies pay for it really fries me. But anyhow, we'll see how it shakes out. Joan, I could be completely wrong. Thank you for the call, and I'm glad to hear that your son is doing well. That's great news. That's why we want to have clinical trials. We want a system that works. Anyhow, thanks so much for being with us today. We will be back tomorrow, and don't forget, and in fact, tomorrow will be Anything Goes Friday. Don't forget, democracy begins with you. It's not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. Tag, you're it. See you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets. And they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeats.com.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.